There is a book in the Bible that does not begin with creation, does not open with a genealogy, does not introduce a hero setting out on a journey, and does not announce the word of the Lord coming to a prophet in a vision. It begins with something far more intimate than any of those things. It begins with a father speaking to his son, with a voice reaching across the distance between one generation and the next, carrying something too important to be left unsaid, too urgent to be postponed, too valuable to be wasted. My son, hear my instruction. Pay attention. Do not forget. Let your heart hold fast to these words, because your life, the actual quality and direction and depth of your life, depends on what you do with wisdom. That book is Proverbs, and it is unlike anything else in the Bible. Unlike the dramatic narratives of Genesis and Exodus, unlike the thundering prophecies of Isaiah and Jeremiah, unlike the deeply theological arguments of Romans and Galatians, unlike the apocalyptic visions of Daniel and Revelation, Proverbs is different. It is immediate, it is personal, it is practical in the deepest sense of that word, not shallow or superficial, but rooted in the daily texture of ordinary human life and speaking directly into it with a wisdom that is anything but ordinary. Proverbs does not deal with kings and armies in the way that the historical books do. It deals with the conversation you're about to have with a difficult person. It deals with the temptation you are facing right now to take a shortcut that would compromise your integrity. It deals with the money decision in front of you, the friendship you are not sure how to navigate, the anger rising in you that you know will cause destruction if you release it, the pride that tells you you do not need advice from anyone, the fear that whispers your hope is unrealistic and your prayers are going unheard. Proverbs speaks into all of it, directly, clearly, and with the authority of a wisdom that has been tested over thousands of years and found to be exactly what it claims to be. The book was written primarily by Solomon, the son of David, the king of Israel, the man to whom God appeared in a dream and offered him anything he wanted and who asked for wisdom. That request, and the wisdom God gave in response to it, is the foundation from which the Book of Proverbs flows. Solomon's wisdom was legendary in his own lifetime. Kings and queens traveled from distant lands to sit in his court and hear him speak. He composed thousands of proverbs and thousands of songs. He understood botany and zoology and astronomy and architecture and human psychology with a depth that astonished everyone who encountered him. And yet, for all that brilliance, the testimony of Scripture is that his wisdom was not self-generated. It was given. It was a gift from the God who alone possesses wisdom in its fullness and who chose to share it generously with one man who was humble enough to know he needed it. That same God offers the same wisdom to you today. Not the same position or the same platform or the same resources that Solomon had, but the same wisdom. James 1:5, drawing on this Proverbs tradition, declares plainly, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him." Generously, without reproach, without making you feel guilty for not already having it, without reminding you of all the times you ignored it before. He gives it generously to all who ask. That includes you. That is the invitation this entire study rests on. But the wisdom of Proverbs is not a passive gift. It is not deposited into you automatically and then expressed without your cooperation. It requires something from you. It requires attention, the deliberate, sustained, unhurried attention that is becoming increasingly rare in a world that has engineered itself to produce the opposite. It requires humility, the honest acknowledgement that you do not already know everything you need to know, that your instincts are not always reliable, that the path that seems right to you might be the path that leads somewhere you do not want to go. It requires courage, because wisdom will sometimes direct you in ways that are uncomfortable, ways that challenge your preferences and disrupt your plans and call you to a higher standard than the one you have been settling for. This study is designed to give you sustained time in the wisdom of Proverbs, not a brief overview, not a highlight reel of famous verses, but a genuine, extended, immersive encounter with the teachings of this book. Enough time for the wisdom to move from the surface of your mind into the deeper places where it can actually change things. That is the invitation. And if you accept it, by the time this study is finished, something in you will be different. Not because of the quality of our teaching, but because of the power of God's Word to do exactly what He designed it to do. Proverbs 4:20-22 captures it perfectly. My son, be attentive to my words, incline your ear to my sayings. Let them not escape from your sight, keep them within your heart, for they are life to those who find them, and healing to all their flesh. Life, healing. These are the promises attached to taking the wisdom of Proverbs seriously. Let us receive them. Before we begin the first teaching, we want to stop for a moment and acknowledge you personally. Right now, across the world, people are watching this from an extraordinary range of places and circumstances. Someone in a kitchen in the United Kingdom making tea before the rest of the family wakes up. Someone in a car in the United States parked somewhere quiet because the house is too loud. Someone in Nigeria, in Brazil, in the Philippines, in Australia, in Germany, people from every corner of the earth who share one thing in common, a hunger for the Word of God and the wisdom it carries. That is a beautiful thing, and we never take it for granted. So right now in the comments below, we would love for you to tell us where you are watching from. What city, what country, what part of the world. It takes 10 seconds and it does something remarkable. It builds a visible community. When someone in rural Texas sees a comment from someone in Cape Town, or when someone in Manchester reads a comment from someone in Manila, something happens. You realize you are not alone in this. You are part of something larger than yourself. A global gathering of people who love God's Word and who are choosing, in the middle of their ordinary lives, to pursue something extraordinary. Tell us where you are watching from. We genuinely want to know. And please, if this channel has ever fed your spirit, if a teaching has steadied you in a hard season, if a word from Scripture has reached you through something we shared and made a difference, we are asking you sincerely, from the heart, to subscribe. Not as a transaction, not as a favor, but as a commitment. A commitment to keeping this connection alive, to letting this community continue to speak into your life, to making sure that the next time we release something that could help you, it actually finds its way to you. Subscribe now if you have not already. It would mean the world to us, and it would mean something real for your ongoing walk with God. We also want to warmly invite you to become a channel member. Members are a closer circle, people who are serious about going deeper, who want early access to videos before they are released publicly, and who want to be part of a community that is intentionally pursuing wisdom together. If that invitation resonates with you, please look for the membership option on this page. We would love to have you in that closer circle. Now, with great anticipation and genuine prayer for every person watching, let us open the Book of Proverbs together. The first teaching, the fear of the Lord, is the foundation of everything. Proverbs 1:7 declares, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." There is a sense in which everything that will be said in this entire study, every teaching, every verse, every application, every challenge, and every comfort, flows from this single sentence. It is not merely the opening statement of the Book of Proverbs. It is the thesis, the premise, the non-negotiable foundation upon which every other truth in this book stands. If you understand this verse, truly understand it, you will have the key that unlocks the entire book. If you do not understand it, if you treat it as one interesting idea among many rather than the governing reality it actually is, the rest of Proverbs will be accessible to you only on a surface level, as interesting moral advice rather than transforming divine wisdom. So what does it mean to fear the Lord? This is a question worth spending real time on, because the English phrase, fear of the Lord, has accumulated a great deal of misunderstanding over the centuries. For many people, it conjures an image of cowering before an angry, unpredictable deity who might at any moment unleash punishment. It feels, to modern ears, more like terror than reverence, and many have quietly decided that this particular concept belongs to an older, harsher understanding of God that has been superseded by the New Testament emphasis on love and grace. But this is a profound misreading of what the Hebrew yira, the word translated fear, actually communicates. Yira is not the fear of a prisoner who dreads his jailer. It is not the dread of a slave who must perform or face punishment. It is something far richer, far more layered, and far more beautiful than either of those images. It is the combination of awe, reverence, trust, love, and the deep, sober recognition of who God actually is. It is the response of a creature who has genuinely encountered the Creator and has been undone by the reality of that encounter. Think of it this way. When Isaiah saw God in the temple, enthroned in glory, with seraphim above him crying, "Holy, holy, holy," and the foundations shaking and the smoke filling the room, his immediate response was not calm appreciation. He fell apart. "Woe is me," he cried, "for I am ruined. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." This is yira. This is the fear of the Lord. The overwhelming recognition of divine holiness set against human limitation. The breathtaking awareness that you are standing before someone infinitely greater than yourself, and that this someone is not merely powerful, but also holy. Not merely holy, but also good. Not merely good, but also personal and specifically interested in you. This fear does not produce paralysis. It produces exactly the opposite. It produces wisdom. It produces a reordering of life around what is actually most true and most real. When you genuinely fear the Lord, you stop ordering your life around the approval of people who will be gone in 70 years and start ordering it around the word of a God who is eternal. You stop treating your own understanding as the final authority and start submitting it to the one being in the universe who actually sees everything clearly. You stop chasing things that seem valuable from a limited perspective and start investing in things that are genuinely valuable from an eternal one. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, not a chapter in the middle, not an advanced concept for mature believers. The beginning, which means that a person who has tremendous intelligence, great education, wide experience and sophisticated social skills, but who does not fear the Lord is, by Proverbs' reckoning, not wise. They may be clever, they may be impressive, they may even be successful by many of the metrics that the world uses, but they are building on the wrong foundation, and the building they construct, however tall it appears, will not stand when it matters most, and the contrast the verse draws is equally important. But fools despise wisdom and instruction. The word fool in Proverbs is not a casual insult. It's a precise theological category describing a particular posture toward God and toward wisdom. The fool is not necessarily unintelligent. There are extraordinarily intelligent fools, people of exceptional cognitive ability who have chosen to exclude God from their operating framework and who therefore consistently arrive at conclusions that Proverbs would identify as foolish. The fool is the person who has decided that their own understanding is sufficient, who has placed themselves at the center of their moral universe, who cannot receive instruction because they already know, who cannot be corrected because their self-image cannot sustain the acknowledgement of being wrong. And Proverbs says, the fool despises wisdom, not ignores it, despises it. There is an active hostility in the fool toward the things of God, toward accountability, toward correction, toward humility, toward any claim that there is a standard above their own preferences. This hostility is not usually expressed openly. It disguises itself as sophistication, as independence, as enlightened thinking, as the refusal to be controlled by ancient and outdated religious ideas. But beneath whatever costume it wears, it is the same thing: the refusal to bow, the refusal to submit, the insistence on being the ultimate authority in one's own life. Proverbs says this path leads to destruction. Not because God is punishing the fool out of spite, but because a life built on a wrong foundation cannot hold. The fear of the Lord is not an arbitrary religious requirement. It is the alignment of human life with the reality in which it exists. To live without it is like trying to build a structure without understanding gravity. You can work very hard and produce something that looks impressive for a while, but eventually physics will assert itself, and everything that was built against it will come down. The practical invitation this teaching offers is this: every single day, before you are fully immersed in the noise and demand and complexity of your life, take a moment to return to the beginning. Not the beginning of your to-do list, not the beginning of your plans and goals and strategies, the beginning of wisdom, a moment of genuine, unhurried acknowledgement of who God is. A moment of conscious submission. Lord, today I want to walk in your wisdom and not merely my own. I want to fear you in the biblical sense, reverently, trustingly, lovingly. I want everything I do today to be filtered through the reality that you are God and I am not, that your ways are higher than mine, that your word is truer than my feelings. That daily return to the beginning is not weakness. It is the smartest thing you can do with the first moments of any given day. It is the foundation upon which everything else that follows can be built to last. The second teaching: wisdom was there before everything else. Proverbs 8:22-31 offers one of the most extraordinary passages in the entire book. The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of old. Ages ago I was set up at the first, before the beginning of the earth. When he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep. Then I was beside him, like a master workman, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and delighting in the children of man. In this remarkable passage, wisdom speaks in the first person about her own origin and nature. She was not created as an afterthought. She was not assembled in response to human need. She was present before the earth existed, before the seas were bounded, before the mountains were shaped, before the first human being drew the first breath. She was beside God as he made everything, a master workman, a craftsman, a delighted collaborator in the act of creation itself. This passage is doing something profound and theologically rich. It is saying that wisdom is not merely a human concept that intelligent people have developed over time through careful observation and accumulated experience. Wisdom is woven into the very structure of reality. It is the ordering principle of the universe. It is the pattern according to which everything was made, which means that to live according to wisdom is not to impose an external religious constraint on life. It is to live in alignment with the way things actually are. The wise life is the life that fits reality. The foolish life is the life that fights against it. Think about what this means for the practical decisions of your life. When Proverbs tells you that honesty is better than deception, it is not simply expressing a cultural preference. It is pointing to something written into the fabric of reality itself. the way the universe was designed to work. When it tells you that pride leads to destruction, it is not moralizing. It is describing the actual mechanics of how things go when a life is built around something as fragile and ultimately illusory as the self at the center. When it tells you that generosity produces more than hoarding, it is not being idealistic. It is tracing the lines of a created order in which open hands receive and closed fists starve. The wisdom of Proverbs is not one option among many for how a human life might be organized. It is the instruction manual written by the manufacturer of human beings. And anyone who has ever ignored the instruction manual for something they built or purchased and then wondered why it broke down will immediately understand the analogy. The closing phrase of this passage is perhaps the most tender. Wisdom is rejoicing in his inhabited world and delighting in the children of man. Wisdom delights in human beings. She was not crafted in cold detachment from human experience. She was fashioned in joy, in delight, in a kind of playful creativity that found its greatest pleasure in the world that was being made and the people who would inhabit it. This means that the wisdom available to you is not grudging or reluctant or condescending. It is offered with delight, with the genuine joy of a craftsman sharing the secrets of their craft with someone who genuinely wants to know. You are not a burden to wisdom. You are the reason she calls out. You are the one she has been delighting in since before you knew she existed. Come and learn from her. She has been waiting for you, and she has been rejoicing at the prospect of this very encounter. The third teaching, wisdom calls and the simple must choose, Proverbs 1:20-33, gives us wisdom crying out in the streets, and then, in a passage that is startling in its urgency and even its sternness, warning about what happens when her call is ignored. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing and fools hate knowledge? If you turn at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you. I will make my words known to you. Wisdom's invitation is extraordinarily generous. If you turn, just redirect your attention, just stop walking in the wrong direction and turn toward wisdom, she will pour out her spirit, not drip it, not offer it cautiously, contingent on your proving yourself worthy. Pour it. The language is lavish, abundant. The offer is not proportional to your current state. You do not have to be at a certain spiritual level to receive wisdom. You do not have to have your life together first. You just have to turn. But the passage continues, and it gets harder, because wisdom also warns about what happens when the call is persistently rejected. Because I have called and you refuse to listen, have stretched out my hand and no one has heeded. Because you have ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you. This sounds harsh. It sounds unlike the God of love and grace that the New Testament reveals. But read it carefully. Wisdom is not threatening arbitrary punishment. She is describing consequence. When calamity comes, and for the person who has persistently rejected wisdom and chosen foolishness, calamity is not a possibility, but an inevitability. Wisdom's response is almost one of sorrowful recognition. Did I not tell you? Was I not there calling you to turn? Did I not stretch out my hand again and again, and you would not take it? This is the voice of a parent whose child has driven recklessly and crashed, not rejoicing in the crash, but grieved that all the warnings given were not heeded. The laughing and mocking of wisdom in this passage are not expressions of divine cruelty. They are the vindication of truth. Reality always eventually vindicates wisdom. The consequences of foolishness are not imposed from outside by an angry deity. They are built into the structure of things. But here is the turn that this passage ultimately makes, and it is the point toward which everything is building. But whoever listens to me will dwell secure and will be at ease without dread of disaster. Security, ease. The absence of the constant nagging bone-deep dread that comes with knowing, at some level, that your life is not built on solid ground. This is what wisdom offers. Not just information, not just better decision-making techniques, but the deep, abiding security of a life aligned with reality and with the God who made it. Three kinds of people are addressed in this passage: the simple, the scoffer, and the fool. The simple person has not yet committed to a direction. They drift, carried by whatever current is strongest, shaped by whatever environment they happen to be in, making decisions based largely on instinct and social pressure rather than considered wisdom. They are not bad, they are unformed, and wisdom's call to them is essentially, stop drifting, choose a direction, not any direction, the right one. Incline your ear to wisdom and let it do what it was designed to do in your life. The scoffer is further along on the wrong road. They have developed not just a lack of wisdom, but an active contempt for it. The scoffer is the person who turns everything serious into a joke, who uses irony as a shield against being genuinely confronted, who cannot engage in an honest conversation about God or faith or accountability without retreating behind a wall of cynicism. Scoffing is one of the most effective mechanisms the enemy of wisdom has devised, because it keeps wisdom at a safe distance without requiring any real engagement with it. The scoffer never has to honestly examine wisdom's claims. They just make sure those claims never get close enough to be honestly examined, and the fool, as we have discussed, has moved beyond passive rejection into active hostility. The fool hates knowledge, not because knowledge is threatening in itself, but because genuine knowledge leads to accountability, and the fool will not be held accountable to anyone or anything above their own preferences. Wisdom calls all three. The call is still going out. The hand is still extended. The offer is still on the table. Turn, just turn, and everything that wisdom has to pour out will be poured. That is the promise. That is the invitation. And every person watching this right now is somewhere in that spectrum, not yet having arrived at perfect wisdom, still in some area or another being called to turn. The question is whether you will. The fourth teaching: trust God with every part of your life. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths." And these 4 lines have been memorized by more people than almost any other passage in the Old Testament. They appear on more decorative items, more graduation cards, more social media posts than perhaps any other verse in Proverbs. And precisely because of that ubiquity, they have become for many people almost invisible, so familiar that we no longer actually read them. We recognize them. We nod at them. We perhaps feel a mild warmth when we encounter them. But we do not sit with them long enough for them to do their work. So let us be deliberate about sitting with them now. Let us read them slowly, phrase by phrase, and let each phrase land. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. The Hebrew word translated trust here is batach, and it carries the image of a person leaning their full weight on something, not touching it gently, not making cautious contact with their fingertips while keeping their weight balanced over their own feet, but actually fully, completely transferring their weight onto it, the way a person collapses gratefully against a wall after a long and exhausting journey, the way someone who has been standing for hours finally completely sits down. Trust, in the biblical sense, is not a feeling, it is a transfer of weight. And notice what it says, with all your heart, not with the part of your heart that feels faith-inclined on a good day, not with your Sunday self or your best moments, all of it. The worried portion, the grieving portion, the angry portion, the confused portion. The portion that is quietly convinced that God has forgotten about a specific situation you have been praying about for years. The portion that is afraid that the thing you most want will never come. All of that, bring it, trust it into His hands. Lean your full weight on His character and His promises rather than on your own management of your own life. Do not lean on your own understanding. This is where the verse becomes genuinely difficult, because our own understanding is the instrument we use for absolutely everything. It is how we process the world. It is how we evaluate information, make decisions, form opinions, assess risk, determine what is true. And Proverbs is not saying our understanding is worthless. It is not telling us to stop thinking. It is telling us not to make our own understanding the ceiling, the final authority, the last court of appeal, the lens that filters everything, including the Word of God. There are paths that look completely sensible to human understanding and lead directly into destruction. There are decisions that feel entirely right and do enormous damage. There are relationships that seem obviously good and prove to be toxic. There are choices that our logic endorses and God's Word warns against. The problem is not that our understanding is always wrong. The problem is that it is always limited. It sees from one angle. It is shaped by experiences and biases we are often not even aware of. It is susceptible to the distortions of fear and desire and pride in ways that are very difficult to detect from the inside. In all your ways, acknowledge Him. The Hebrew here is beautiful. The word acknowledge, yada, means to know with intimacy, with experience, with the depth of genuine relationship. This is not a formal acknowledgement of God's existence. It is the acknowledgement of relationship, the daily, practical, conversational recognition of His presence in all your ways, not just in the big decisions, not just in the spiritual moments, in the choosing of words in a difficult conversation, in the spending of money on an ordinary Tuesday, in the management of time and energy and attention, in the small decisions that seem too trivial to bring to God and that are, in fact, exactly where character is formed and life is actually lived. In all of it, acknowledge Him. And He will make straight your paths, the promise. And it is breathtaking in its scope and its simplicity. God takes responsibility for the direction of a submitted life. He makes the paths straight. Not easy. Straight is not the same as easy. Not obstacle-free. Straight does not mean smooth, not the shortest possible route from here to your desired destination, but straight in the sense that it leads somewhere real, that it has direction and purpose and the quality of trajectory, that you will not be walking in endless confused circles, but moving forward with the confidence of someone whose steps are being ordered by someone far wiser and far more far-seeing than themselves. This promise is not conditional on perfection. It is conditional on submission. You do not have to trust God perfectly to receive His guidance. You have to trust Him genuinely, to bring your decisions to Him honestly, to hold your plans loosely enough to let Him redirect them, to remain open to the possibility that the straight path He has in mind does not look exactly like the path you were planning to take. What does this look like practically? It looks like beginning the day with a deliberate act of submission rather than a deliberate act of self-management. It looks like pausing before major decisions and asking not just, "What do I think is best?" but, "Lord, what are you saying about this?" It looks like reading scripture not to find proof texts for decisions you have already made, but to genuinely seek His perspective on the decisions in front of you. It looks like seeking counsel from people whose lives demonstrate wisdom. It looks like being willing to wait when everything in you wants to move, and being willing to move when everything in you wants to wait, because the God whose path you are on knows things about the timing that you cannot yet see. Trust Him with all of it. He has never lost a person He was guiding. The fifth teaching, Guard the source, and everything downstream changes. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." Above all else. There is not a more emphatic way to express priority in the Hebrew wisdom tradition. This is not a suggestion. It is not one item on a list of helpful spiritual practices. It is the first priority. The thing that must be protected before everything else receives attention, the discipline that underlies all other disciplines, the practice that, if neglected, makes every other spiritual effort ultimately unsustainable. Guard your heart. But what is the heart in Proverbs' understanding? In our contemporary usage, the heart is primarily the seat of emotion. We talk about following our hearts, about what our hearts feel, about matters of the heart, and we almost always mean the emotional dimension of our experience. But in the ancient Hebrew understanding, the heart, the lev, was something far more comprehensive. It was the center of a person, the place where thought and will and desire and motivation and belief all converged. It was not merely where you felt things, it was where you decided things, where you truly were. The inner control room of your entire life. The heart in Proverbs is the place from which the real you operates, not the presented version of yourself, not the face you show in social situations, not the image you maintain for different audiences, but the actual you that exists at the center of your being. And Proverbs says that everything, absolutely everything, that comes out of your life flows from that place. Your words flow from it. Your relationships flow from it. Your habits flow from it. Your responses under pressure flow from it. Your capacity for joy and your tendency toward despair, your ability to love and your propensity for anger, your generosity and your selfishness, all of it has its source in this one place. Jesus understood this perfectly. When the religious leaders of his day were meticulous about external behavior and presented themselves as models of spiritual propriety, he went directly to the source. For from within, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person. He was not delivering a new teaching. He was applying the ancient wisdom of Proverbs to the specific failure he was observing, the failure of people who had polished the outside while neglecting the inside, who had managed their external behavior while leaving the internal source completely unguarded and unattended. So how do you guard your heart? The answer that Proverbs gives throughout its pages is rich and multifaceted, and it is worth exploring at length. The first element of guarding the heart is being intentional about input. What you consistently put into your heart will determine what comes out of it. This is not complicated. It is one of the most basic laws of cause and effect. The heart is not a sealed container that maintains its own environment, regardless of what surrounds it. It is porous. It absorbs. It is shaped by what it is consistently exposed to. The music you listen to most consistently is shaping your emotional landscape. The content you consume most regularly is shaping your assumptions about reality. The conversations you participate in most frequently are shaping your values and priorities. The people you spend the most time with are shaping your character in ways both visible and invisible. Proverbs 4:20-22 precedes our verse with this instruction: "My son, be attentive to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. Let them not escape from your sight. Keep them within your heart. For they are life to those who find them, and healing to all their flesh." The word of God is medicinal for the heart. It reaches places that nothing else can reach. It speaks to the deep interior of a person with a precision and a power that no other voice possesses. A heart that is consistently immersed in Scripture is a heart that is being continuously oriented, corrected, encouraged, and aligned with what is actually true. This is not optional for the person who wants to guard their heart. It is the primary instrument of that guarding. The second element of guarding the heart is being intentional about what you keep out. A guard is not just someone who helps things in, they are someone who keeps certain things out. Not everything that presents itself at the gates of your heart deserves entry. Bitterness, if invited in and accommodated, will corrupt the entire source. It does not stay contained in one corner. It spreads. It colors everything. It distorts your perception of people and situations that have nothing to do with the original wound. Unforgiveness works the same way. It takes up residence in your heart and becomes a lens through which everything is eventually filtered until you cannot even see clearly anymore because bitterness is refracting everything. Envy, when allowed to root in the heart, produces a constant dissatisfaction that makes genuine gratitude impossible. Pride, when it is entertained rather than confronted, produces a brittleness that makes genuine relationship very difficult. Lust, when it is fed rather than resisted, distorts the heart's capacity for real intimacy. These things do not arrive announcing themselves as destroyers. They arrive looking appealing, feeling natural, claiming to be simply what you deserve or simply what makes sense. Guarding the heart means learning to recognize them early and dealing with them before they establish residence. The third element is what Proverbs calls keeping your eyes looking forward. Proverbs 4:25 says, "Let your eyes look directly forward and your gaze be straight before you." There is a discipline of attention, of being deliberate about what you focus on. Worry is largely the product of focusing on everything that could go wrong, rather than trusting the God who is already in the future you are anxious about. Comparison is largely the product of focusing on what others have, rather than stewarding what God has given you. Discontentment is largely the product of focusing on what is absent rather than recognizing what is present. Guarding the heart involves guarding the gaze, choosing deliberately what you give your attention to, because what has your attention eventually has your heart. Guard your heart, not as an act of fearful self-protection that withdraws from the world, but as an act of deliberate spiritual stewardship, tending the source from which your entire life flows, so that what flows from it increasingly resembles the wisdom, love, and character of the God in whose image you were made. The sixth teaching, what your mouth does to your world. Proverbs 18:21 says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruits." Stop and let that verse breathe for a moment. Death and life, both of them, available from the same instrument, residing in the same few square centimeters of muscle and bone. The words that come out of your mouth, and as we will explore, the words that run continuously in your own mind about yourself and your circumstances, carry within them the power of death and the power of life. And Proverbs says that those who love the tongue, who are careless with it, who overuse it, who deploy it without thought, will eat its fruits. Whatever the tongue has been sowing, the one who wields it will eventually harvest. This is one of the most practically consequential truths in the entire book of Proverbs, and it is one of the most consistently ignored. We live in a culture that celebrates the unfiltered voice. That equates authenticity with saying whatever comes to mind. That has made a virtue of bluntness and has confused cruelty with honesty and volume with courage. And against all of that, Proverbs stands with a quiet and unmovable insistence. Words matter, profoundly, with consequences that echo far beyond the moment in which they are spoken. Proverbs 12:18 says, "There is one whose rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing." Rash words, words spoken without thought, words driven by the heat of the moment, words deployed in anger or frustration or contempt without any consideration of their impact, are compared to sword thrusts. not to a bruise that fades in a week, to a sword, cutting deep, leaving wounds that take far longer to heal than the moment of speaking took to pass. Anyone who carries words spoken to them in childhood, in a relationship that ended badly, in a moment of rejection or humiliation. Anyone who has lived for years inside the echo of something someone said to them at a vulnerable moment knows exactly how accurate this comparison is. Rash words are sword thrusts, and they leave marks. But the same verse offers the other side. The tongue of the wise brings healing, the exact same instrument, the exact same action of opening the mouth and producing sound. But when it is governed by wisdom, by genuine thought, by actual care for the person receiving the words, by a commitment to truth spoken in love, it brings healing. It reaches into places that medication and therapy cannot always reach because it speaks to the soul. A word of genuine affirmation, delivered at the moment when someone has begun to doubt their worth, can redirect the entire trajectory of their life. A word of patient correction, offered without contempt and without condescension, can save someone from a mistake that would have cost them enormously. A word of honest compassion, given without trying to fix or minimize what the grieving person is experiencing, can be the very presence of God in the middle of someone's darkest night. Proverbs 15:1 offers one of the most practically useful observations in the book. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. This verse describes something that anyone who has ever navigated a heated conflict has observed but may not always have had the self-control to apply. When someone comes at you with anger, frustration, accusation, or blame, every natural impulse says to match their energy, to respond to heat with heat, to sharpness with sharpness, to volume with volume. It feels like strength. It feels like not backing down. It feels like not letting them win. But Proverbs says it accomplishes one thing and one thing only. It escalates. It pours fuel on a fire that was already burning. A soft answer does something entirely different. Not a doormat answer, not the silence of someone who is so conflict-averse they will absorb anything, but a genuinely measured, gentle, unhurried response that refuses to match the other person's heat. This is extraordinarily difficult in the moment. It requires the kind of self-mastery that only comes from deep, sustained inner work. But Proverbs says it turns away wrath. It actually changes the atmospheric pressure of the conflict. It gives the other person's emotional state somewhere to land rather than somewhere to bounce off, even harder. It creates space where there was no space, and that space is where resolution becomes possible. Proverbs 17:27-28 adds, "Whoever restrains his words has knowledge, and he who has a cool spirit is a man of understanding. Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent." In an age of constant commentary, where every platform rewards the immediate, unfiltered reaction, where silence is often interpreted as having nothing to say, the discipline of restraint is profoundly countercultural. But Proverbs esteems it. The person who thinks before speaking, who chooses which conversations to enter and which to leave alone, who does not feel compelled to fill every silence and respond to every provocation. This person is on the path of wisdom. They are exercising a strength that most people never develop because most people never try. Proverbs also addresses the specific danger of gossip with particular force. Proverbs 11:13 says, "A gossip betrays a confidence, but a trustworthy person keeps a secret." And Proverbs 20:19 says, "A gossip betrays a confidence, so avoid anyone who talks too much." Gossip is the use of speech to trade in other people's private information, their failures, their struggles, their secrets, as a form of social currency. It is so normalized in so many environments, including, sadly, many religious ones, that it can be difficult to recognize it for what it is. But Proverbs is unambiguous. Gossip is a betrayal. It is a misuse of information that was given in trust, and the person who gossips about others will inevitably gossip about you. The same mouth that brings you the intimate details of someone else's life will, in another context, bring the intimate details of your life to someone else. Proverbs, practical wisdom. Avoid the person who cannot keep confidences, and examine whether you yourself are that person. Proverbs 25:15 says, "With patience a ruler may be persuaded, and a soft tongue will break a bone." A soft tongue, patient, persistent, gentle, not aggressive, can eventually move what forceful speech cannot. This is one of the counterintuitive wisdoms that experience consistently validates. The person who is always pushing, always insisting, always making their case loudly and emphatically, often produces resistance, while the person who speaks quietly, who listens genuinely, who remains patient and consistent and kind, often produces movement that no amount of pressure could have achieved. Gentle persistence is more powerful than aggressive insistence. This is wisdom that the wise have always known, even when it has been ignored by the powerful. Finally, this teaching reaches into the inner life, because the most constant stream of speech you are exposed to is not what comes out of other people's mouths. It is what runs continuously in your own mind about yourself, the internal monologue, the running commentary, the voice that evaluates everything you do and everything you are. And the same principle applies there. What you tell yourself about yourself shapes what you believe. What you believe shapes how you act. How you act shapes the patterns of your life. I am terrible at relationships. I always mess things up. I am not smart enough for this. Nobody really values what I bring. These are seeds planted in the soil of your own heart, and over time they produce a harvest exactly as real as any spoken aloud. Guard what you say to others. Guard equally what you say to yourself. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, including the inner tongue that only you can hear. Speak life over others and over yourself, and eat the fruit of that choice. The seventh teaching, the anatomy of pride and why it always falls. Proverbs 16:18 says, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." And Proverbs 16:5 adds, "Everyone who is arrogant in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Be assured he will not go unpunished." These are among the most sobering statements in the Book of Proverbs, and they deserve to be held with full seriousness. Not in the way of someone who is relieved that they apply to other people, but in the way of someone who is genuinely asking, is this operating in me? Because pride is, of all the vices Proverbs addresses, the one that is most uniquely capable of hiding itself from its own host. Every other weakness has moments of visibility. You can notice your anger when it erupts. You can recognize your fear when it paralyzes you. You can feel your greed when you clutch. You can identify your lust when it pulls at you. But pride has a unique capacity for self-concealment. It disguises itself as confidence, and sometimes they genuinely look the same from the outside. It disguises itself as high standards, a refusal to accept anything less than excellence, when what it actually is an inability to share credit, receive correction, or acknowledge that someone else might have a better idea. It disguises itself as discernment, a wise ability to see the flaws in others' thinking, when what it actually is the habit of dismissing anything that does not originate in itself. The word translated pride in Proverbs 16:18 is in the Hebrew gaion, which carries the idea of something rising, swelling, elevating itself. There is a kind of natural confidence that Proverbs celebrates, the quiet assurance of someone who knows their identity before God, who is not constantly destabilized by others' opinions, who carries their gifts with grace and their limitations with honesty. But gown is something different. It is the swelling of a spirit that has placed itself at the center of its own universe, that measures everything by its own standards, that cannot receive correction because it is already certain it is right, that cannot honor others because it is too preoccupied with claiming honor for itself, that cannot genuinely listen because it is always mentally preparing its own response. Pride goes before destruction. The word before is crucial. Not sometimes, not frequently, before. It is a spiritual law, as reliable as any physical law you could name. Wherever unchecked pride is fully operational in a life, destruction is downstream. The time frame varies, the form varies. Some collapses are sudden and dramatic, others are slow and barely perceptible. A gradual hardening of relationships, a growing isolation, an increasing inability to learn or grow, a progressive disconnection from reality that ends in something no one quite saw coming. But the direction is always the same. Pride elevates, and what elevates on the wrong foundation always comes down. Proverbs 11:2 says, "When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with the humble is wisdom." And the connection between humility and wisdom is not accidental. Wisdom requires openness, the ongoing willingness to be instructed, corrected, informed, and redirected by something outside yourself. Pride closes that openness. The proud person believes they already know, which means they cannot learn. They believe they are already right, which means they cannot be corrected. They believe their judgment is reliable enough to be their final authority, which means they are navigating life with a compass they trust entirely, but that has not been calibrated to true north. Proverbs 29:23 says, "One's pride will bring him low, but he who is lowly in spirit will obtain honor." The Teton. And Proverbs 18:12 says, "Before destruction a man's heart is haughty, but humility comes before honor." The pattern is absolutely consistent throughout the book. The posture of elevation produces a downward journey. The posture of humility produces an upward one, not because humility earns reward as a transaction, but because humility is the posture that allows God to actually work in a life. The humble person can receive instruction. They can be redirected without collapsing. They can be corrected without becoming defensive. They can be passed over for recognition without being destroyed. They can serve without needing to be seen. And that particular combination of qualities positions them for a kind of honor that is real and lasting, given by others who have genuinely witnessed something worth honoring. The practical application of this teaching is uncomfortable precisely because it requires looking in a mirror without flattering lighting. Where is pride operating in your relationships? In your marriage or significant relationships, does pride make it impossible for you to apologize first? In your friendships, does it prevent you from admitting when you were wrong? In your work, does it make you resistant to feedback or unable to share credit with those who contributed to your success? In your relationship with God, does it produce a subtle sense that you have earned His favor through your spiritual performance, rather than receiving it as pure grace? The antidote is not self-deprecation or performed smallness. It is the clear-eyed, daily recognition of where everything good in your life actually comes from. It is gratitude as a practiced discipline, not as a feeling that arises naturally when things go well, but as a deliberate posture of acknowledgement. Everything I have that is worth having has been given to me. My gifts are gifts. My opportunities were arranged by someone else. My capacity to think and work and love and create is not self-generated. It flows from the one who made me, sustains me, and redeems me. That recognition, genuinely held, not merely assented to intellectually, is the beginning of the kind of humility that Proverbs celebrates, and from that place the gracious gifts of wisdom and honor that God reserves for the humble begin to flow. The eighth, teaching, the gift of righteous friendship. Proverbs 13:20 says, "Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm." And Proverbs 27:17 adds one of the most beautiful images in the entire book. Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. The wisdom tradition has always understood that no person becomes wise alone. Wisdom is not a solo project. It is not produced in isolation by an individual who has sufficiently developed their personal spiritual practice. It is forged in relationship, in the friction and warmth and challenge and comfort of sustained, genuine connection with other people who are themselves pursuing wisdom. The image of iron sharpening iron captures this perfectly. Two pieces of iron pressing against each other do not simply coexist. They change each other. The contact produces heat and sparks and refinement. Real friendship does the same thing. This teaching calls us to think carefully about what we mean when we say we have friends. In an age when the word friend has been so thoroughly diluted by social media that it can mean anything from a lifelong companion to someone who followed your account last Tuesday, Proverbs' understanding of friendship stands out in its depth and seriousness. The friendship that Proverbs describes is not based primarily on mutual enjoyment or shared interests or convenient proximity. It is based on mutual sharpening, on the kind of relationship where both people are genuinely made better by the connection. Proverbs 17:17 gives us the defining characteristic of this kind of friendship. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity. The weatherproofness of genuine friendship is what distinguishes it from more casual connection. Anyone can enjoy someone's company when life is good. Anyone can show up for the party. But friendship in the Proverbs sense shows up when the party is over and the crisis has begun. It loves at all times, in the times of failure, in the times of grief, in the times when the person being loved is not at their most lovable. This is not natural, this is a choice. A sustained, costly, beautiful choice that is one of the highest expressions of human love. Proverbs 27:6 offers one of the most searching descriptions of what a truly wise friend does. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. Profuse are the kisses of an enemy. The faithful friend wounds sometimes, not from cruelty or carelessness, but from love and honesty. They tell you the truth when the truth is uncomfortable. They point out the blind spot that is about to cause you harm. They refuse to simply validate every decision you make, because they care more about your actual good than about your temporary approval of them. These wounds, as Proverbs calls them, are faithful. They can be trusted. They come from a heart that is genuinely for you. The enemy's kisses are contrasted with these faithful wounds. The person who always tells you what you want to hear, who flatters you extravagantly and never challenges you, who is warm and affirming and utterly uncritical. This person is not necessarily your friend. They may be, in the Proverbs sense, something closer to an enemy, not because they mean you harm, but because their relentless affirmation keeps you from seeing the things you need to see, and that blindness is doing you harm, regardless of how pleasant the interaction feels. Proverbs 22:24-25 offers very specific guidance. Make no friendship with a man given to anger, nor go with a wrathful man, lest you learn his ways and entangle yourself in a snare. This is remarkably concrete. Not every type of problematic person is named. Proverbs is selective here, and the selection is instructive. The person given to anger is named specifically because anger is uniquely contagious. Sustained exposure to chronic anger recalibrates your emotional responses. It normalizes reactions that should not be normal. It makes you more reactive, more volatile, more prone to explosion, not through a single dramatic event, but through the gradual, almost invisible process of adaptation. The baseline of what seems like a normal emotional response gets shifted, and by the time you realize what has happened, the habits are established and the damage is done. The positive counterpart to these warnings is the call to actively, intentionally pursue the company of people who are pursuing wisdom. This is not about social elitism, selecting your friends based on their achievement level or their spiritual resume. It is about recognizing that the people who have your deepest access are shaping you and choosing deliberately to give that access to people who will shape you in the direction of wisdom rather than away from it. Who are the voices in your life that consistently point you toward God, that challenge you to grow, that tell you the truth with love, that show up when things are hard and stand beside you without flinching? Those people are one of the greatest gifts you will ever receive. Treat them accordingly and be, for someone else, exactly that. The ninth teaching, diligence as a spiritual practice. Proverbs 6:11 says, "Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief, officer or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man." The ant. An insect so small it can be crushed without effort, so common it is rarely noticed, so ordinary it would seem an unlikely source of wisdom. And yet Proverbs says, "Go and look, consider her ways, watch what she does and let it instruct you." What does the ant do that is so noteworthy? She works without being told to. There is no supervisor standing over the ant colony with a performance review system and disciplinary procedures. There is no external accountability structure requiring the ant to show up and produce. She works because work is what she is. It is intrinsic to her nature. She is not motivated by visible short-term reward. The harvest she is storing up for the winter has not yet arrived, and winter itself is months away. She is motivated by a kind of deep, built-in wisdom about the relationship between present effort and future provision. And from that wisdom, she works consistently, tirelessly, without excuse and without delay. Proverbs contrasts this with the sluggard, and the portrait of the sluggard is one of the wryly humorous sections of the book. Proverbs 26:14-15 says, "As a door turns on its hinges, so does a sluggard on his bed. The sluggard buries his hand in the dish. It wears him out to bring it back to his mouth." The comparison to a door is perfect. A door moves back and forth on its hinges all day without ever going anywhere. The sluggard turns on their bed, shifting position, maybe even getting up briefly, but never actually going anywhere, never actually producing anything. And the image of someone too tired to raise food to their own mouth is almost comedic in its exaggeration. Proverbs uses humor here, but the point beneath the humor is entirely serious. The person who is chronically unwilling to do the work that life requires of them is not just inefficient. They are developing a character that will define and limit them. But it is important to understand what Proverbs means by diligence. It is not workaholism. It is not the relentless, anxiety-driven productivity that has become a kind of virtue signal in contemporary culture. The constant busyness, the willingness to sacrifice health and relationships on the altar of professional achievement. Proverbs elsewhere insists on the value of rest. Proverbs 3:24 says, "When you lie down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet." God designed human beings to need rest, and the refusal to rest is not virtue, it is the denial of a created need. Biblical diligence is not about working as much as humanly possible. It is about working faithfully within the responsibilities God has given you. Proverbs 14:23 makes a crucial distinction. In all toil there is profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. Actual work, the doing of the actual thing that needs doing, produces something. All the talking about it, planning about it, reading about it, posting about it, discussing it with other people who are also not doing it, none of that produces anything. This is one of the most quietly devastating observations in the entire book, because it describes with devastating accuracy one of the most common ways that contemporary people substitute the appearance of productivity for the substance of it. Reading every book about writing is not writing. Watching every tutorial about the business you want to start is not starting the business. Consuming hours of content about the habit you want to develop is not developing the habit. At some point, the information must become action, the planning must become execution, the talking must become doing. Proverbs 21:5 adds the dimension of wise planning to diligence. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. Diligence without planning is effort without direction. Hard work that has not been strategically aimed tends to produce exhaustion rather than outcomes. The wise person combines the consistent willingness to do the actual work with the thoughtful forethought that ensures the effort is aimed in the right direction. Work hard and work smart, not as a modern business platitude, but as ancient wisdom, rooted in the observation that both effort and direction matter and that neither alone is sufficient. Proverbs 22:29 makes a simple and profound observation. Do you see a man skillful in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men. Excellence in work opens doors, not always immediately, not always in the ways we expect. But a person who genuinely does what they do with skill and integrity and consistency is noticed. Because excellent work stands out in a world where mediocrity has become the norm, and showing up at all is sometimes treated as an achievement. When you do your work with genuine care, when you bring the best of what you have to every task, not only the ones with an audience, you are practicing the kind of diligence that Proverbs says eventually brings you before the highest possible audience. Whatever your work is today, paid or unpaid, public or private, celebrated or invisible, do it as Proverbs recommends. Do it well, do it faithfully, do it with the consistency that comes from knowing that you are ultimately working not for human approval, but for the God who sees the work done in the hidden places as clearly as the work done on the most visible stage. That conviction is the foundation of a diligence that does not depend on recognition to sustain itself. And it is the kind of diligence that over time builds something extraordinary. The 10th teaching. Integrity is not a policy, it is a person. Proverbs 11:3 says, "The integrity of the upright guides them, but the crookedness of the treacherous destroys them." The word integrity comes from the Latin integer, meaning whole, complete, undivided, intact. A number is an integer when it has not been fractured into fractions. A structure has integrity when all its parts are unified and working together as they were designed to. And a person has integrity when who they are in private is the same as who they are in public, when there is no gap between the values they profess and the choices they make, between the person they present to the world and the person who exists when no one is watching. Integrity in Proverbs is not primarily about following rules, though it certainly produces rule-following behavior. It is about being a whole person, someone who is not divided into different versions of themselves for different audiences, Someone who does not need to remember what they told whom because they told everyone the same thing. Someone who makes the same decision when the only witness is God as they would make if the whole world were watching. The integrity of the upright guides them. This is remarkable. Integrity itself becomes a guide. When your life is genuinely organized around honesty and consistency, a kind of internal compass develops that makes decision-making cleaner and clearer. You don't have to calculate the angles. You don't have to weigh different people's perceptions. You don't have to manage competing versions of yourself. You know what you stand for, and therefore you know what you will do. Integrity simplifies. It removes the exhausting complexity of self-management. And that simplification is not just practically useful, it is deeply freeing. Proverbs 10:9 says, "Whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but he who makes his ways crooked will be found out." The security of the person who walks in integrity is real, not the security of having no problems. Integrity does not guarantee smooth circumstances, but the security of not carrying concealment, of not lying awake, calculating exposure, of knowing that there is nothing hidden in your life that would devastate you if it were known. That security is one of the most genuinely restful qualities a human life can have, and it is available only through integrity. He who makes his ways crooked will be found out. This is a spiritual law that Proverbs states with complete confidence. The hidden things do not stay hidden. Proverbs 26:26 says, "Though his hatred is covered with deception, his wickedness will be exposed in the assembly." The concealed thing may remain concealed for a time, sometimes a very long time. And during that time, the person carrying the concealment may develop a degree of comfort with it, may tell themselves that they have successfully separated their secret life from their public one, may even begin to believe that the concealment is permanent. Proverbs says otherwise. God sees the hidden things, and in his time and in his way, he arranges for them to become visible. This is not a statement about God's vindictiveness. It is a statement about the nature of truth. Truth is not content to remain hidden indefinitely. It has a kind of pressure to it, an insistence on eventually making itself known. Crooked things built on deception eventually reveal the deception in their eventual collapse. The lie cannot hold the weight of a life built on it. Eventually the structure fails, and what was underneath is exposed. Proverbs 27 gives us one of the most beautiful images of integrity's legacy. The righteous who walks in his integrity, blessed are his children after him. What is passed down through integrity is extraordinary. It is not primarily a financial inheritance, though integrity tends to produce things worth inheriting financially. What is passed down is something more durable and more formative, a model. Children who grow up watching a parent live with genuine integrity do not need to be told what integrity looks like. They have seen it. They have watched how their parent handled the temptation to cut corners and did not. They have seen what it looks like to tell the truth when lying would have been easier, to keep a commitment when breaking it would have been more convenient, to treat the person who can do nothing for you with the same respect given to the person who could do everything. That model, absorbed over years of close observation, becomes one of the most powerful inheritances a person can give. It shapes character at a level that no external force can easily undo. The righteous parent who walks in integrity is not just making good choices for themselves. They are making a contribution to the generations that come after them, a contribution that will continue bearing fruit long after they are gone. Walk in integrity today, not because someone is watching, because you are the kind of person who walks in integrity whether someone is watching or not. That is the definition, and it is the foundation on which everything else in your life can be safely built. The 11th teaching, what money can and cannot do. Proverbs 11:28 says, "Whoever trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like a green leaf." Proverbs is neither anti-wealth nor pro-poverty. It does not romanticize financial struggle or treat prosperity as inherently suspect, but it is ruthlessly honest about the limits of money, about what it can and cannot provide, about what it does and does not signify, and about the specific spiritual dangers that wealth carries with it for those who are not wise enough to handle it carefully. Proverbs 13:7 gives us one of the most incisive observations about the relationship between appearance and reality in financial matters. One person pretends to be rich, yet has nothing. Another pretends to be poor, yet has great wealth. The gap between how people appear financially and what they actually have is a perennial feature of human social life. The family whose house and car and wardrobe suggest prosperity and who are quietly drowning in debt. The person whose modest lifestyle and unpretentious manner suggest limited means and who has quietly built something genuinely substantial. Proverbs sees through appearances to reality and consistently identifies the appearance-based approach to wealth as foolish and the substance-based approach as wise. Proverbs 23:4-5 offers some of the most direct advice in the entire book about the pursuit of wealth. Do not toil to acquire wealth. Be discerning enough to desist. When your eyes light on it, it is gone, for suddenly it sprouts wings, flying like an eagle toward heaven. The person who makes the acquisition of wealth their primary goal, who organizes their entire life around getting more, will find that the wealth they are chasing is perpetually just ahead of them, and when they do get it, it proves not to deliver what they imagined it would. Because wealth is not a destination, it is a resource. And a resource, however large, cannot satisfy the needs that only God can meet. Proverbs 10:2 says, "Treasures gained by wickedness do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death." The how of wealth acquisition matters as much as the what. Money gained through dishonesty, exploitation, deception, or the violation of others is not genuine wealth in the Proverbs sense. It is a liability dressed as an asset because it carries within it the seeds of its own unraveling. What is taken dishonestly will eventually be taken back, not always through dramatic divine intervention, but through the natural consequences of the character that produced the dishonesty in the first place. Proverbs 22:1 is worth rereading in every generation. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and favor is better than silver or gold. And a good name, a reputation built through consistent integrity, genuine kindness, faithful dealing, and honest work, is worth more than the most impressive bank balance, because wealth can be lost through circumstances entirely outside your control. Markets crash, industries change, businesses fail, natural disasters happen, but a reputation built over years of consistent, honest, loving engagement with the world around you is extraordinarily durable. It survives the crashes. It outlasts the changes, and it opens doors that money alone never could. Proverbs 15:16-17 offers a perspective that challenges some of the implicit assumptions of contemporary prosperity. Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and trouble with it. Better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a fattened ox and hatred with it. The quality of a life is not determined primarily by the quantity of its resources. A small, simple life organized around the fear of God and genuine love for the people in it is better, in Proverbs' honest assessment, than a large, resource-rich life that is organized around acquisition and characterized by conflict and emptiness. This does not mean that poverty is virtuous or that abundance is problematic. It means that the presence or absence of love and the fear of the Lord determine the actual quality of a life more than the presence or absence of material resources. Proverbs 28:20 says, "A faithful man will abound with blessings, but whoever hastens to be rich will not go unpunished." The hastening, the cutting of corners, the willingness to compromise integrity for speed, the impatience with the slower rhythms of honest work and faithful stewardship is what Proverbs identifies as the source of disaster in financial matters. Not wealth itself, not the desire to prosper, the haste that bypasses integrity in pursuit of the destination. And then Proverbs 38:9, the prayer that contains within it more financial wisdom than most books on the topic. "Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me, lest I be full and deny you and say, 'Who is the Lord?' Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God." The person praying this knows themselves well enough to know that both extremes carry spiritual danger. Too much produces the comfortable independence that forgets God. Too little produces the desperate need that can override integrity. The request is for enough, the manna quantity, the daily bread that keeps you dependent on God without driving you to desperation. It is not a prayer of low ambition. It is a prayer of profound wisdom about the conditions under which a soul flourishes. The 12th teaching, the secrets of lasting relationships. Proverbs 19:14 says, "House and wealth are inherited from fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord." And Proverbs 31:10-12 says, "An excellent wife who can find, she is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life." Proverbs has a great deal to say about relationships, particularly the most intimate and consequential of all earthly relationships. And while the primary framing of Proverbs 31 is the relationship of husband and wife, the principles it embodies extend into every significant relationship. The quality of character in the people we are most closely connected to matters enormously, and the investment in building relationships of genuine trust and mutual faithfulness is among the wisest investments a human being can make. The heart of her husband trusts in her. Trust, in Proverbs' understanding, is the foundation of genuine relationship. Not chemistry, though chemistry matters. Not shared interests, though those enrich relationship. Not even love in the sentimental sense, though love is essential. Trust. The specific, earned, demonstrated conviction that this person can be counted on, that their word means something, that they are consistent in private and in public, that when they say they will do something, they do it, that when they make a commitment, they keep it, that their character is not a performance for audiences, but an expression of who they actually are. Trust takes time to build and can be destroyed in a moment, which is why Proverbs treats the character of the people you are most intimately connected to as something to be evaluated carefully and seriously. Proverbs 14:1 says, "The wisest of women builds her house, but folly with her own hands tears it down." Indeed, the building or tearing down of a household, a family, a shared life, is not primarily a matter of resources or circumstances. It is a matter of character. A person of wisdom in the context of intimate relationship builds, consistently, patiently, brick by brick, over time. A person of folly tears down, often with the same hands that were ostensibly building, through the erosion of trust, the accumulation of small dishonesties, the repeated small selfishnesses that over time constitute a profound pattern. Proverbs 21:19 says, "It is better to live in a desert land than with a quarrelsome and fretful woman." And Proverbs 25:24 says, "It is better to live in a corner of the housetop than in a house shared with a quarrelsome wife." So these verses, read in their ancient context, are not primarily about gender. They are about the specific character quality of chronic quarrelsomeness, which Proverbs regards as one of the most destructive forces that can operate in the context of intimate shared life. The quarrelsome person, regardless of gender, generates constant conflict, drains the relational atmosphere of the household, and creates a living environment that is genuinely toxic, regardless of how well appointed the house itself might be. Proverbs' characteristic wisdom: the quality of the relationships in a space matters infinitely more than the quality of the space itself. The positive vision that Proverbs holds out is something extraordinary. Proverbs 5:18-19 says, "Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breasts fill you at all times with delight. Be intoxicated always in her love." This is not the language of cold duty. This is the language of delight, of a love that has been tended and grown and is still alive, still beautiful, still intoxicating. Not despite the years, but in some way because of them. Proverbs celebrates this kind of enduring, joyful, deeply satisfying partnership as one of the genuine goods of a well-lived life. Proverbs 17:9 says, "Whoever covers an offense seeks love, but he who repeats a matter separates close friends." The practice of covering an offense, absorbing a slight rather than making an issue of it, choosing the relationship over the need to be right, letting something go because the friendship is worth more than the grievance, is identified here as an act of love. This is not the same as pretending hurt did not happen or allowing patterns of genuinely harmful behavior to continue unchallenged. It is the recognition that in any relationship that matters, there will be moments when you have a choice: the relationship or the grievance. And wisdom consistently chooses the relationship. Proverbs 27:10 says, "Do not forsake your friend and your father's friend, and do not go to your brother's house in the day of your calamity. Better is a neighbor who is nearby than a brother who is far away." The wisdom here is about proximity and loyalty, the deep value of the people who are present with you, who show up, who are actually there. The most technically close relationship, a sibling, a family member, is less valuable in the moment of crisis than the person who is actually present and ready to help. And this points to one of the most important investments you can make: building the kind of relationships that will be there when the crisis comes. Not just the relationships that are pleasant when life is good, but the ones that are rooted deeply enough to hold when the ground shakes. The 13th teaching, patience, the virtue that changes everything. Proverbs 16:32 says, "Whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city." We touched on the power of the tongue earlier. Now we go deeper into the closely related virtue of patience, the slow, burning, deeply disciplined, genuinely transformative quality that Proverbs identifies as the mark of a truly great person, greater than the military conqueror, greater than the most powerful leader, the person who can rule their own spirit, who can feel anger without being controlled by it, face provocation without immediately reacting to it, experience disappointment without collapsing into bitterness. This person possesses a greatness that is far rarer and far more consequential than any external conquest. Proverbs 19:11 says, "Good sense makes one slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook an offense." That word glory is worth sitting with. Not merely tolerance, not merely the resignation of someone who has decided it is not worth the energy. Glory, something genuinely admirable, something worth celebrating. The ability to be genuinely wronged and choose not to escalate, to absorb the impact without retaliation, to preserve a relationship that impulsive anger would have destroyed, is a mark of a truly powerful and truly wise person. And Proverbs says it is their glory. Proverbs 14:29 says, Whoever is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who has a hasty temper exalts folly. The connection between patience and understanding is not coincidental. The person who is slow to anger takes time, takes the space between provocation and response to understand, to consider, to ask what is actually happening here. What does this person actually need? What is the real situation beneath the surface emotion? That space is where understanding lives. And the hasty person, who responds before that space can be occupied, consistently acts on incomplete information and produces outcomes that exalt folly. Proverbs 25:15 says, "With patience a ruler may be persuaded, and a soft tongue will break a bone." This is counterintuitive and deeply true. The person who patiently persists, who keeps coming back gently, who does not force or demand but quietly, consistently, lovingly continues to make their case, eventually moves what forceful insistence could not. This applies in marriage, in parenting, in friendship, in professional relationships, in leadership. The patient voice, sustained over time, achieves things that the loud voice, deployed in a single dramatic moment, almost never can. Proverbs 15:18 says, "A hot-tempered man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger quiets contention." The presence of a patient person in a room changes the atmosphere. Their steadiness is not passive, it actively moderates. It gives other people's heightened emotional states somewhere to settle rather than somewhere to escalate. The person who is genuinely slow to anger is not someone whose emotions have been flattened or whose fire has been extinguished. They are someone who has developed such mastery of their own interior life that they can be present in the middle of genuine conflict without being captured by it. That presence is one of the most powerful and practically useful gifts a person can bring to any environment. How is patience developed? Not by suppressing emotion. Suppressed emotion does not disappear. It goes underground, where it does far more damage than it would have done above the surface. Patience is developed by processing emotion honestly and humbly, bringing the anger or frustration or disappointment to God in prayer, letting His perspective work on yours before you act, and making the deliberate, repeated, cumulative choice to respond rather than react. Every time you make that choice, every time you pause before responding, every time you ask a question instead of making an accusation, every time you choose the soft answer over the sharp one, you are building something. A character of genuine patience that is, as Proverbs says, greater than taking a city. The 14th teaching, hope in the seasons of waiting. Proverbs 13:12 says, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a desire fulfilled is a tree of life." There are few verses in all of Scripture that more honestly and compassionately name the experience of long waiting than this one. Hope deferred, the accumulated weight of a prayer persistently prayed and not yet answered. A longing deeply held and not yet satisfied, a promise believed and not yet seen, makes the heart sick. Not weak, not faithless, sick, in the way that a body can be sick from something entirely outside its control. The heart that has hoped and waited and hoped and waited and is still waiting is not a heart that has failed. It is a heart that is genuinely exhausted by the sustained effort of trusting in the invisible. Proverbs names this experience without trying to fix it, without adding a quick spiritual postscript that minimizes the reality of the ache. It simply says, "This is real." Hope deferred makes the heart sick. If you are in a season of hope deferred right now, a season of waiting that has stretched beyond what you imagined you could endure, a prayer that has been on your lips for so long that you sometimes wonder if you are still supposed to be praying it. This verse is specifically for you. Your experience has a name. It is understood. It is not a failure of faith. It is a human heart doing the painful, noble, genuinely costly work of trusting in something it cannot yet see. But the verse does not end with sickness. It contrasts, a desire fulfilled is a tree of life. A tree of life in the biblical imagination is not just a pleasant experience. It is the tree from the garden, the tree at the center of Eden, the tree that appears again in Revelation with leaves for the healing of the nations. It is a symbol of profound, life-giving abundance, something that produces not just a moment of relief, but an ongoing source of nourishment and vitality. When God answers the long prayer, when the desire that has been held through years of waiting is finally fulfilled, the joy is not proportional to the pleasure of the moment. It is proportional to the length and depth of the waiting. The longer and harder the wait, the sweeter and more abundant the fruit of the answer. This does not make the waiting easier in the middle of it. Proverbs does not promise that it will, but it does make the waiting meaningful. The waiting is not wasted. God is doing something in the seasons of deferred hope that He does not do in the seasons of immediate gratification. He is building a depth of trust, a root system of faith that can only be developed through sustained dependence. The faith of a person who has prayed for 10 years and not yet seen the answer and who continues praying is qualitatively different from the faith of a person whose prayers have always been answered quickly. Not better necessarily, but deeper, more tested, more absolutely convinced of God's faithfulness, not because circumstances have proven it, but because character has been forged through circumstances that did not prove it externally, and yet the faith endured. Proverbs 23:18 says, "Surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off." This verse speaks directly into the experience of deferred hope. The future exists. The hope is not cut off. God has not forgotten. He has not changed His mind. He has not overlooked your situation. He is at work in the silence, in ways that the silence itself cannot communicate, but that will eventually be revealed. If you are waiting today, whatever the specific waiting is, let this word reach you with the specificity it was designed to carry. Your hope is not deferred because you are lacking faith. It is deferred because God, in His wisdom and His love, is preparing something that will be worth every moment of the wait. And when it comes, when the desire is finally fulfilled, you will understand in a way that is not yet fully available to you why the timing was exactly right. He is not late, He is not finished, He is at work. Hold on. The 15th teaching, the power of generosity to unlock abundance. Proverbs 11:24-25 says, "One gives freely, yet grows all the richer. Another withholds what he should give, and only suffers want. Whoever brings blessing will himself be enriched, and one who waters will himself be watered." Generosity in Proverbs is not an optional spiritual upgrade available to those who have reached a certain level of financial comfort. It is a fundamental posture toward the world, an orientation of the heart that reflects the character of the God who is Himself infinitely generous, and that produces, as a consequence of that reflection, a kind of abundance that the hoarding spirit never experiences. One gives freely, yet grows all the richer. This is counterintuitive to every financial instinct we naturally possess. The basic arithmetic of resource management says that if you give something away, you have less of it. And at a purely material level, that is true. But Proverbs is describing a dynamic that operates at a level above the purely material, a principle built into the structure of a universe made by a generous God. Those who give freely, who open their hands, who release their grip on their resources, who trust that God can replenish what they have given away, find themselves in the experience of growing richer, not necessarily in the currency they gave away, but in something, in ways that only those who have actually practiced this discover. Another withholds what he should give and only suffers want. The key phrase is what he should give, meaning there is a responsibility involved. The person who has the means to give and withholds it from legitimate need is not merely being cautious, they are violating something. And the consequence, in the economy of God's creation, is want. The grip that tightens to hold finds itself holding less. The spirit that hoards discovers that hoarding is not, in God's economy, a reliable strategy for security. Proverbs 19:17 contains one of the most astonishing promises in the entire book. Whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his deed. Lends to the Lord. This is remarkable language. To give to someone in genuine need is not a loss. It is a loan, with God himself as the debtor. Not because God needs your money or is obligated to you in a transactional sense, but because he has chosen, in the mystery of his compassion, to identify himself so thoroughly with the needs of the vulnerable that what is done to them is effectively done to him. And what he receives, he repays. The repayment may not come in the same currency. It may not come on your timeline, but from a God who owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, you need not fear that he is short on the resources with which to repay. Proverbs 3:9-10 frames generosity as an act of worship. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine. The first fruits principle, giving the first and best rather than the last and least, giving off the top rather than off the bottom, is an act of faith. It is the practical declaration that God is the source and I am the steward, that my security is in his provision rather than in my accumulation, that his claim on my resources is honored before my own desires are addressed. This is genuinely difficult. It cuts against natural instinct. And it is precisely that difficulty that makes it an act of faith rather than mere generosity. Proverbs 21:13 warns about the consequence of closed-fistedness. Whoever closes his ear to the cry of the poor will himself call out and not be answered. The person who consistently refuses to hear the legitimate need of others, who has developed an elaborate system of reasons why they are not responsible for the struggle of people around them, is cultivating a spiritual condition that ultimately works against them in their own moment of need. This is not a threat. It is a description of how spiritual responsiveness works. The heart that remains open to need, that practices the costly discipline of attentiveness to others' struggles, is a heart that stays alive to grace in ways that the closed heart cannot sustain. Practice generosity, not as a transaction, not as a spiritual investment strategy designed to produce material returns, but as the expression of a heart that has been genuinely touched by the generosity of a God who gave everything. Give your money, yes, but also give your time, your attention, your energy, your words of encouragement, your willingness to show up. Water someone else today and trust the promise. One who waters will himself be watered. The 16th teaching, the dangerous path that looks right. Proverbs 14:12 says, "There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death." This verse is repeated almost verbatim in Proverbs 16:25. And that repetition, in a book that is generally not repetitive, is deliberate. The Holy Spirit, working through the wisdom writers, saw fit to say this twice because human nature needs to hear it more than once. We are uniquely vulnerable to the thing this verse describes, a path that feels entirely right, that makes complete sense from where we are standing, that our emotions endorse and our reasoning confirms and our desires validate, and that leads somewhere catastrophic. The terrifying word in this verse is seems right. Not merely slightly miscalculated, seems entirely right. The person on this path has not made an obvious error that anyone around them can point to. They have constructed or adopted a perspective, a narrative, a justification that is internally coherent, that holds together, that can be defended, that the person themselves genuinely believes. Proverbs 16:2 exposes the mechanism. All the ways of a man are pure in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the spirit. All of them. The adulterous person who genuinely believes the relationship was too beautiful to deny. The dishonest business person who has convinced himself that the system was designed to take from him, so taking from it is simply fairness. The person who drifted from God and told himself he was just taking a break from religion, not from God himself, and gradually found that the distinction had disappeared. The parent who told themselves they were simply avoiding unnecessary conflict with their adult child, when what was actually happening was a slow failure of loving accountability. Every one of them had a story. Every one of them had a way that seemed right. This is not a reason for paralysis. Proverbs is not telling you that all decision-making is hopeless because you might be deceived. It is telling you that your own perspective, as the sole instrument of navigation, is not reliable enough to carry the full weight of your life. And it is pointing to the instruments that are the Word of God, prayer, the counsel of wise people, and the willingness to submit your conclusions to something outside yourself before you commit to acting on them. Proverbs 15:22 says, "Without counsel plans fail, but with many advisers they succeed." The wisdom of seeking multiple perspectives, of deliberately choosing to bring your conclusions to people who might see things you are missing, is not weakness. It is the recognition that wisdom in its fullness is not a solo project. The person who makes all their decisions in isolation, trusting entirely their own judgment, is the person most at risk from the path that seems right. The person who actively seeks wise counsel, who asks difficult questions, who genuinely considers the possibility that they might be wrong, is building in the corrective capacity that their own limited perspective cannot provide. Proverbs 11:14 says, "Where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in an abundance of counselors there is safety." Not perfection, not the elimination of risk, safety. The kind of safety that comes from having multiple eyes on a decision, multiple perspectives in play, multiple wise voices contributing to a conclusion. This is the antidote that Proverbs offers to the dangerous path that only seems right. And there is one more element, humility before God's word. The most important safeguard against the path that seems right but ends in death is the willingness to submit your sense of rightness to the authority of Scripture. When your feelings about what is right and the word of God diverge, and they will regularly throughout a faithful life, the person of wisdom chooses the word over the feeling. Not because feelings are irrelevant, but because feelings are limited, context-dependent, and susceptible to the distortions of desire and fear and pride in ways that the Word of God is not. Let your heart be submitted. Let your perspective be held lightly. And let wisdom, the counsel of the wise, the Word of God, the guidance of the Spirit, be the authority that has the final word in the most consequential decisions of your life. The 17th teaching, correctable people. Go further. Proverbs 15:31-32 says, "The ear that listens to life-giving reproof will dwell among the wise. Whoever ignores instruction despises himself, but he who listens to reproof gains intelligence." There is a simple, powerful test for wisdom that Proverbs offers throughout its pages, and it is this: can you be corrected? Not corrected without any emotional response. That would be either dishonesty or the absence of investment. But corrected in such a way that the correction actually lands, actually changes something, actually produces different behavior. Because the person who genuinely receives correction is on a fast track to wisdom. And the person who cannot be corrected is on a fast track to a very expensive form of repeating their mistakes. Proverbs 12:1 makes the point with characteristic bluntness. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but he who hates reproof is stupid. The word stupid here, bar in Hebrew, meaning brutish, insensible, is not being used casually. Proverbs is making a precise observation about the condition of a person who has cut themselves off from one of the primary instruments of growth. An animal cannot reflect on its behavior, evaluate whether it was wise, and choose to do things differently. A person can. But the person who refuses correction is, in that specific domain, functioning at the level of an animal, unable to learn from the feedback that life is offering. He who listens to reproof gains intelligence, not just maintains their current level of understanding, gains, grows, develops. Each correction genuinely received is a shortcut to wisdom, someone showing you a place on the map where your current understanding is wrong, before you travel too far in the wrong direction and discover the error through much more painful means. The correctable person can grow through someone else's insight rather than only through their own hard experience, and that is an enormous advantage. Proverbs 19:20 says, "Listen to advice and accept instruction, that you may gain wisdom in the future." The phrase "in the future" is significant. The instruction you receive and genuinely accept today produces wisdom not just for today's decision, but for the entire terrain ahead. It builds a cumulative understanding that compounds over time. Every piece of genuine wisdom added to a teachable heart makes the next piece of wisdom more accessible, because wisdom builds on itself. Proverbs 27:5-6 gives us the positive vision. Better is open rebuke than hidden love. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, profuse are the kisses of an enemy. The friend who rebukes you, who points to the blind spot, who tells you the uncomfortable truth, who refuses to simply validate everything you do because they care about your actual good more than your momentary approval, is exhibiting a form of love that is higher and more demanding than the comfortable, unchallenging affirmation of someone who tells you only what you want to hear. This is what genuine friendship looks like in Proverbs. Not the friendship that feels best in the moment, the friendship that helps you become the person you are actually capable of being. Are you correctable? That is the question this teaching leaves with every person who will honestly ask it. Not in theory. Yes, of course I am open to feedback, but in practice. When was the last time someone told you something uncomfortable about yourself and you genuinely changed in response to it? When was the last time you sought out the perspective of someone who might disagree with you on something important and genuinely considered what they said? When was the last time you were wrong about something significant and said so plainly, without hedging, without self-justification? The correctable person is not weak. They are on the fastest road to wisdom that exists. Make yourself that person and surround yourself with the kind of people who love you enough to tell you the truth. The 18th teaching, the family that wisdom builds. Proverbs 22:6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it." And Proverbs 27 says, "The righteous who walks in his integrity, blessed are his children after him." Proverbs invests more in the subject of family, of parents and children, of the transmission of wisdom across generations, than almost any other single theme. This makes sense because the book itself is structured as a parent speaking to a child. The framework of the entire collection is familial. Wisdom is not primarily an academic enterprise delivered in lecture halls to students who come and go. It's a living transmission, personal and relational, flowing from one generation into the next through the most intimate of all human connections. Train up a child in the way he should go. The Hebrew word translated train, chanak, is fascinating. Its root meaning has to do with dedicating something, with initiating it, with setting it on its intended course. The word was used for the dedication of a building, the act of formally setting it apart for its intended purpose and inaugurating its use. When applied to children, it carries the idea of recognizing what they were made for and setting them on the trajectory toward that purpose from the beginning, not forcing them into a predetermined mold, not crushing their unique personhood into conformity with parental preferences, but seeing who they are, their particular gifts, their particular personality, their particular bent, and training them in the wisdom that fits who they actually are. The promise, even when he is old, he will not depart from it, has been the source of both tremendous comfort and genuine wrestling for parents over the centuries. It is not a guarantee of mechanical outcomes. Children are not machines, and parental faithfulness does not override human freedom. But it is a statement of deep spiritual principle. The formation that happens in the earliest years, in the home, through the daily rhythms of life with parents who are themselves pursuing wisdom, does not simply evaporate. It goes deep. It becomes part of the very architecture of the person. And even when a child wanders, as children often do, the deep formation remains, waiting like a compass whose needle is still pointing to true north, even when the person carrying it is walking in the wrong direction. What does faithful formation of children look like? Proverbs gives us a rich picture. It looks like modeling, because children learn from watching far more than from being told. A parent who prays not just talks about prayer, but actually prays, who sits with their open Bible in the morning, who says honestly, "I was wrong," when they make a mistake, who treats every person they encounter with genuine respect, regardless of social status, is teaching their child wisdom through 1,000 unspoken lessons. It looks like conversation. Proverbs is built on dialogue. A parent who engages their child honestly, who answers their questions with the truth even when the truth is complicated, who brings the wisdom of Scripture into the kitchen table conversation as naturally as any other topic. Deuteronomy 6, deeply connected to the Proverbs tradition, says, "Talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise." Underitum, the integration of wisdom into the fabric of ordinary daily life, is the primary mode of its transmission. It looks like faithful, loving discipline. Proverbs 13:24 says, "Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him." Read carefully and charitably, this verse is not permission for harshness. It is an assertion that genuine love does not avoid the difficult work of correction. A parent who never corrects their child is not loving them. They are leaving them unprepared for a world that will not be as infinitely tolerant as the parent has been. The loving correction, consistent, proportionate, always aimed at the child's formation and growth rather than the parent's frustration, is one of the most demanding and most important expressions of parental love. And it looks like prayer. Ultimately, a parent's most important work in their child's life is not visible from the outside. It is the hidden, consistent, sometimes desperate intercession that brings the child before God and trusts Him to do what no parent can do: reach the interior of the child's heart and make His home there. The formation of a child's character is a cooperative work between faithful parents and a faithful God. Our part is faithfulness. His part is the transformation that only He can produce. The 19th teaching, the architecture of a life that holds, Proverbs 24:3-4, says, "By wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. By knowledge the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches." This is one of the most comprehensive statements in Proverbs about the relationship between wisdom and the structure of a life. And the word house here is doing a great deal of work. It refers not primarily to a physical structure, though it includes that, but to everything that a life contains and produces. The family it encompasses, the relationships it nurtures, the legacy it leaves, the culture it creates and sustains, the character it develops over time. All of that is the house, and all of it, Proverbs says, is built by wisdom. 3 words are used: wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. In the Proverbs tradition, these are not synonyms. They are related, but distinct. Wisdom, Hokmah, is the overarching orientation toward life that flows from the fear of the Lord, the practical, applied, lived expression of alignment with God's truth. Understanding, Binah, is the capacity to discern, to see beneath the surface, to grasp the implications and connections of things. Knowledge, Da'at, is the intimate, experiential knowing that comes from sustained engagement with a subject or person. Together, the 3 form a complete picture. You need the foundational orientation of wisdom, the discerning capacity of understanding, and the experiential depth of knowledge to build something that genuinely holds. Proverbs 14:1 provides the devastating contrast. The wisest of women builds her house, but folly with her own hands tears it down. The destructive force is not an external enemy. It is not an unfavorable market or difficult circumstances or the failures of other people. It is folly, operating from the inside, using the very hands of the person who ostensibly wants to build. This is one of the most honest and difficult truths Proverbs offers. We are often the primary agents of our own undoing, the habits that are slowly eroding the integrity of a relationship, the patterns of thought that are gradually building a prison of negativity, the accumulated small, dishonestful eyes that are incrementally destroying trust. The consistent neglect of things that matter most in favor of things that seem urgent but are actually trivial. All of this is folly tearing down with its own hands what wisdom would build. Proverbs 9:1 says, "Wisdom has built her house, she has hewn her 7 pillars." 7, the number of completeness in biblical symbolism. Wisdom's house is not a shack. It is a complete, well-designed, properly engineered structure, built on the right foundation, with the right materials, with the right dimensions. 7 pillars suggest a structure that can bear weight, a life that has the interior architecture to carry the load of difficulty, loss, disappointment, and change without collapsing. What are the pillars of a life built by wisdom? Drawing from everything Proverbs has taught us, they might be named something like this: the fear of the Lord as the foundation, integrity as the load-bearing walls, humility as the roof that allows for continued growth without the danger of exposure to pride's storm, wise speech as the windows through which light enters and relationship is sustained, diligence as the floors on which daily life is conducted, generosity as the doors through which blessing flows both in and out, and love, the deep, faithful, costly love that Proverbs celebrates in its picture of excellent friendship and excellent marriage, as the hearth around which everything else gathers for warmth and sustenance. Build well, not quickly, not primarily for appearance, not in competition with anyone else's building. Build with the materials that Proverbs commends: honesty, faithfulness, humility, diligence, genuine love, consistent prayer, daily surrender to the wisdom of a God who knows exactly what a lasting house looks like. Build slowly, if necessary. The house that lasts is the house that was built carefully and built right. And Proverbs promises that the house built by wisdom, regardless of how unimpressive it might look compared to the quickly assembled structures of folly, will stand when the storm comes. The 20th teaching, the blessing that comes from a generous eye. Proverbs 22:9 says, "Whoever has a bountiful eye will be blessed, for he shares his bread with the poor." A bountiful eye. What a beautiful phrase. The bountiful eye is an eye that looks out at the world and sees need and is moved by what it sees. It is the opposite of the eye that has trained itself to look away, that has developed the socially acquired blindness that allows prosperous people to move through communities of genuine need without being genuinely disturbed by what they see. The bountiful eye has not developed that trained unseeing. It remains genuinely open, genuinely responsive, genuinely moved. And Proverbs says this person will be blessed, not because their generosity earns divine favor in some transactional sense, but because the bountiful eye is the sign of a heart that is alive to grace, a heart that has remained soft to the needs of others, and in remaining soft has remained capable of receiving the softness of God's own grace in return. Proverbs 28:27 says, "Whoever gives to the poor will not want, but he who hides his eyes will get many a curse." The hiding of eyes, the deliberate cultivating of blindness to need, is connected to a kind of poverty that is not primarily financial. The person who systematically closes their eyes to the need around them is developing something in their own soul that eventually impoverishes them in ways they will not immediately recognize. They are cultivating hardness. And hardness, once sufficiently developed, makes it very difficult to receive the grace that comes from a God who is himself, supremely, the one who does not hide his eyes from need. Proverbs 14:21 says, "Whoever despises his neighbor is a sinner, but blessed is he who is generous to the poor." Generosity to the poor is specifically named as a source of blessing, not merely a good thing, not merely the right thing, a source of blessing. The person who regularly, practically, genuinely gives to those in genuine need is stepping into a stream of divine blessing that flows directly from the character of God, who is himself the ultimate expression of generosity toward need. But Proverbs' vision of generosity extends far beyond financial giving. Proverbs 11:25 says, "Whoever brings blessing will himself be enriched, and one who waters will himself be watered." Blessing can be brought in 1,000 forms, with money, yes, but also with time, with presence, with words of genuine encouragement offered at the right moment, with the willingness to listen without trying to fix, with the showing up when showing up is costly and inconvenient, with the phone call that you made because you knew someone needed to hear a human voice today, with the meal delivered, with the errand run, with the hour of practical help that cost you something real. In every one of these forms, the person who brings blessing finds themselves blessed. The person who waters finds themselves watered. This is not a sales pitch for generosity. It is a description of the way the universe works when it is functioning as God designed it. Open hands receive, giving hearts find themselves given to. The life that flows outward toward others finds that the source from which it flows never runs dry. The 21st teaching, humility before honor. Every time, Proverbs 18:12 says, "Before destruction, a man's heart is haughty, but humility comes before honor." We return to this theme because Proverbs returns to it again and again, from different angles, with different language, making the same essential point with a consistency that reflects how deeply important it is and how easily it is forgotten. Humility comes before honor, every single time, without exception. In the economy of the kingdom of God, the order is non-negotiable and non-reversible. Proverbs 15:33 connects these themes. The fear of the Lord is instruction in wisdom, and humility comes before honor. Humility is not merely a personality trait that some people happen to have and others do not. It is connected directly to the fear of the Lord, which means it is, in a very real sense, a theological position. To be humble is to have an accurate theological understanding of your own situation. You are a creature made by God, dependent on Him for everything you have and are, saved not by your own merit, but by His grace, equipped not by your own ability, but by His gifting. That theological reality, genuinely believed and practically lived, produces genuine humility. Proverbs 22:4 says, "The reward for humility and fear of the Lord is riches and honor and life." Three things named together: riches, honor, and life. Not earthly wealth necessarily, though it may include that, but the kind of richness that comes from a life of genuine relationship with God and others. And honor, the kind given by those who have witnessed something genuinely excellent and worthy, not the kind manufactured through self-promotion. And life, in the full, abundant sense that Scripture uses the word, not mere biological existence, but genuine aliveness. And Proverbs 3:34 contains a promise that the New Testament quotes not once, but twice. Toward the scorners he is scornful, but to the humble he gives grace. God gives grace to the humble, not to the successful, not to the talented, not to the religious performer, to the humble, to the one who knows they need grace and comes before God in that awareness, to the one who can say, "I was wrong," without collapsing, to the one who can receive correction without being destroyed, to the one who credits their gifts to the giver and uses them in service of others rather than in the promotion of themselves. Practice humility today, practically, concretely. Apologize to the person you were harsh with without adding a but. Share credit for something you accomplished with the people who contributed to it. Ask for help with something you would normally handle alone in order to maintain the appearance of complete competence. Say, "I was wrong," clearly and without hedging. Seek counsel from someone whose wisdom you respect about a decision you are currently facing. In every one of these small, practical acts, you are building something, a character of genuine humility that positions you to receive what God reserves for those who walk in it. The 22nd teaching, the seasons of life and the wisdom of timing. Proverbs 15:23 says, "To make an apt answer is a joy to a man, and a word in season, how good it is." Wisdom in Proverbs is not merely about knowing what is true. It is about knowing when, the sense of timing, the discernment of which moment calls for which kind of response. The ability to read the season accurately and respond to it appropriately, rather than applying the same approach to every situation regardless of context. The wise person has knowledge, but they also have kairos, the right moment awareness that makes knowledge actually useful. Proverbs describes different seasons of life with a realism that is deeply pastoral. It does not pretend that all seasons feel the same, or that wisdom looks identical in all of them. Proverbs 17:22 says, "A joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones." Two different interior states, two different seasons, and wisdom engages both honestly, neither forcing joy onto genuine grief, nor allowing grief to extinguish the genuine joy that is appropriate in seasons of blessing. Proverbs 25:20 offers a warning about the misapplication of well-intentioned wisdom. Whoever sings songs to a heavy heart is like one who takes off a garment on a cold day and like vinegar on soda. The image is sharp. Cheerful songs sung to a heavy heart, upbeat encouragement offered to someone who is genuinely grieving without first acknowledging the reality and weight of what they are carrying, does not comfort. It irritates. It aggravates. It communicates not that you care, but that you are uncomfortable with their pain and are trying to move them past it faster than they can actually travel. The wisdom of being present in grief, of simply staying, of sitting with someone in their darkness without rushing them toward the light, of saying less and being more, is one of the most difficult and most important forms of wisdom Proverbs implicitly commends. Because the temptation in the face of someone else's suffering is always to do something, to say something, to make it better. And often what is needed is simply not to leave. Proverbs 27:14 says, with gentle humor, "Whoever blesses his neighbor with a loud voice, rising early in the morning, will be counted as cursing." Even genuine blessing offered at the wrong moment or in the wrong way can be experienced as its opposite. Timing matters. Approach matters. The right word is not just the true word or even the kind word. It is the word that fits this person, in this moment, in this season. This teaching calls us to develop the discernment that Proverbs associates with wisdom, the attentiveness to other people's actual state that comes from genuine listening rather than preparing our response, the patience to let a conversation unfold rather than directing it toward the outcome we have already determined is appropriate, the humility to ask what someone needs rather than assuming we already know, the courage to say what needs to be said in the seasons when truth is the most fitting gift, even when silence would be more comfortable, and the restraint to remain silent in the seasons when presence is more needed than words. The 23rd teaching, the long view, seeing what only eternity can reveal. Proverbs 11:7 says, "When the wicked dies, his hope will perish, and the expectation of wealth perishes too." And Proverbs 10:25 says, "When the tempest passes, the wicked is no more, but the righteous is established forever." One of the most consistent and important functions of wisdom in Proverbs is the long view, the ability to see past the immediate and evaluate things from the perspective of their ultimate outcome rather than their present appearance. Because the present appearance of things is frequently misleading. The wicked often appear to prosper in the short term. The righteous often appear to struggle, and without the long view, without the capacity to see past the present moment to what the present moment is building toward, it is very easy to draw entirely wrong conclusions about what kind of life is worth living. Proverbs 24:19-20 says, "Fret not yourself because of evildoers, and be not envious of the wicked. For the evil man has no future. The lamp of the wicked will be put out." No future. This is Proverbs' quiet and confident assessment of what awaits the life built on the wrong foundation. The lamp will be put out. The light that seemed so bright, the prosperity, the success, the power, the comfort will not last, because it was burning on fuel that cannot sustain it. And the person who was tempted to envy it, who looked at the apparent flourishing of the wicked and wondered if wisdom was worth the cost, that person will eventually see what Proverbs knew all along. Proverbs 23:17-18 says, "Let not your heart envy sinners, but continue in the fear of the Lord all the day. Surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off. Continue in the fear of the Lord all the day, every day, in the seasons when it is vindicating itself visibly, and in the seasons when it seems to be producing nothing discernible at all. Because there is a future that the present moment cannot fully reveal. A harvest coming from the seeds being planted right now. A building being raised from the foundations being laid right now. A character being formed from the choices being made right now." Proverbs 12:7 says, "The wicked are overthrown and are no more, but the house of the righteous will stand." Stand. Not temporarily, not until the next storm. Stand. The house of the righteous, built by wisdom on the foundation of the fear of the Lord, with the materials of integrity and faithfulness and genuine love, has a quality of durability that no storm can ultimately undo. Because the one who is building it with them is eternal, and what he builds in a submitted life carries something of his own permanence. This teaching calls us to resist the short-term thinking that the culture around us is constantly producing. to invest in things that do not produce immediate returns, but that will produce durable ones, to sacrifice present comfort for future character, to choose the narrow path that leads to life rather than the wide path that leads elsewhere, even when the wide path has more company and better lighting in the short term. The long view, held consistently and with faith, changes what you invest in, what you sacrifice, what you celebrate, and what you refuse. It is one of the most practically transformative gifts that wisdom offers. The 24th teaching, returning to the source. Every day, Proverbs 8:17 says, "I love those who love me, and those who seek me diligently find me." Wisdom, personified, present before creation, calling out in the streets, building her house on 7 pillars, makes a promise that is perhaps the most personally intimate statement in the entire book. I love those who love me, and those who seek me diligently find me. Not casually, not occasionally, diligently. The word carries the image of early rising, of seeking first thing, of making the pursuit of wisdom the first priority, rather than the thing that gets whatever is left after everything else has been addressed. Proverbs 4:7 says, "The beginning of wisdom is this, get wisdom, and whatever you get insight. Get wisdom. Whatever else you get, whatever else you acquire, achieve, accumulate, experience, in the getting of all of it, get wisdom first." Make wisdom the organizing principle around which the rest of your getting is arranged, because wisdom held at the center makes sense of everything else. Wisdom, absent from the center, leaves everything else in orbit around something that cannot sustain it. What does it look like practically to seek wisdom diligently? It looks like the consistent morning return to the Word of God before the day has flooded you with its noise and demand. It looks like the honest prayer that does not just present God with your list, but actually waits in some form for His response. It looks like the regular, deliberate exposure to the wisdom of people who have walked faithfully for longer than you have, and who have something to show for it. It looks like the commitment to evaluate your life regularly, not just to measure productivity, but to ask whether you are growing in wisdom, whether your character is developing, whether the person you are becoming resembles more closely the person God created you to be. Proverbs 3:21-23 says, "My son, do not lose sight of these. Keep sound wisdom and discretion, and they will be life for your soul and adornment for your neck. Then you will walk on your way securely, and your foot will not stumble. Keep them." This word implies sustained, deliberate holding, not a moment of reception, but a lifetime of retention. The person who receives wisdom once and then drifts back into the currents of a wisdomless culture has not truly retained it. The person who keeps wisdom, who returns to it, who recenters on it, who comes back again and again to the source when they feel themselves drifting, walks securely. Their foot does not stumble even on rough terrain, because the wisdom they carry is functioning as exactly what it was always designed to be: a lamp to the path, a guide for the steps, a source of the security that no external circumstance can produce and no external circumstance can take away. Return to wisdom today. If you have drifted, return. If you have been neglecting the word, return. If prayer has become perfunctory and the scriptures have become unfamiliar, return. Wisdom receives the returning person without reproach. She was calling before you turned back. She will be calling when you arrive. And the moment you turn toward her, she is already there. The 25th teaching. The fear of the Lord is where everything ends and everything begins again. Proverbs 9:10 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." We have walked a very long road together through the Book of Proverbs. We have explored its teachings on speech and integrity, on pride and humility, on friendship and family, on diligence and generosity, on the long view and the present moment, on waiting and seeking and building and receiving. And now we arrive at the end. and find that the end is the same as the beginning. The fear of the Lord. This is not repetition for lack of anything more to say. It is the recognition that wisdom, in its fullness, is circular in the best sense. It keeps returning you to the same center, but from different directions, so that each return reveals something you could not have seen from where you were before. You understand the fear of the Lord differently after exploring integrity than you did before. You understand it differently after sitting with the teaching on patience, on friendship, on the path that only seems right. Every teaching in this book has been unpacking, from a different angle, the implications of this one foundational reality. There is a God. He is holy, He is wise, He is good, and a life organized around the genuine acknowledgement of that reality is the only kind of life that can actually work. Knowledge of the Holy One is understanding, not knowledge about Him, though that is important. Knowledge of Him. The Hebrew yada, the intimate, experiential, relational knowing that comes from walking with someone through difficulty and joy alike, from depending on them when you had no other option, from watching them prove themselves faithful in the moments that tested whether faithfulness was real. This knowledge, deeply personal, irreducibly experiential, built over a lifetime of trusting a God who proves Himself trustworthy, is understanding, not the understanding of a textbook. The understanding of a life. Proverbs 4:18 is the image that best captures where this entire study has been pointing. But the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until full day. Brighter and brighter, not reaching a plateau, not arriving at a fixed level of wisdom and staying there, growing, developing. The person who is walking with God in the fear of the Lord, who is pursuing wisdom diligently, who is applying the teachings of Proverbs to the actual texture of their daily life. This person is on a path that keeps getting brighter. The things that were once confusing become clear. The things that once defeated them become navigable. The things that once seemed impossible to trust become the very anchors of an unshakable confidence. This is the life God has designed you for. Not a perfect life. Proverbs is extraordinarily realistic about human imperfection, about the reality of failure and correction, and the need for ongoing submission to wisdom. But a growing life, a life that is genuinely moving in the right direction, a life whose trajectory, evaluated not in any single moment but over the arc of time, is clearly upward. More wisdom, more integrity, more genuine love, more fruitfulness, more resemblance to the God in whose image you were made. The Book of Proverbs was written for you, for this specific moment in your life, for the decisions you are currently facing and the relationships you are currently navigating and the struggles you are currently carrying and the hopes you are currently holding. The wisdom it offers is not theoretical. It is tested across thousands of years of human experience and found to be exactly what it claims to be: life and healing to those who find it and keep it close. May the fear of the Lord be your foundation. May wisdom be the architecture of your days. May integrity be the material with which you build. May humility be the posture in which you learn. May generosity be the overflow of a heart that has experienced the generosity of God. May patience be the strength you bring to the moments that demand it most. May your speech bring life rather than death, healing rather than harm, truth spoken in love rather than flattery that enables blindness. May your friendships be the kind that sharpen and sustain and remain through the seasons that reveal what relationships are actually made of. And may the path you walk, the path of the righteous, however imperfect and however marked by the honest acknowledgement of that imperfection, shine brighter and brighter, not because of what you have achieved, but because of what God is building in you through the daily, faithful, humble practice of a life ordered around the only foundation that can hold the fear of the Lord, the beginning and the continuing and the ultimate completion of all wisdom. A closing reflection, what remains? Proverbs 31:30 says, "Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised." And in the final chapter of Proverbs ends not with a declaration of achievement, but with a description of character. Not with a list of accomplishments, but with an orientation of the heart. The woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. And that praise is the closing note of an entire book about wisdom, suggesting that wisdom, in its fullest expression, always brings us back here. To the heart that is genuinely surrendered to God. To the life that is organized, in all its ordinary daily texture, around the reality of who He is. Charm is deceitful. The things that attract the eye and the things that sustain a life over time are frequently not the same things. The surface qualities that make an immediate impression, charisma, physical beauty, social facility, the ability to say the right thing at the right moment, are real gifts, and they have their place, but they cannot carry the weight of a life. They cannot sustain a marriage through the middle years when the early excitement has settled into something steadier and deeper. They cannot hold a family together through the kinds of crises that test what people are actually made of. They cannot provide the security that a human soul needs in the darkest nights. Only character can do these things. Only the deep formation of a heart genuinely submitted to God. And beauty is vain, not worthless. Proverbs celebrates beauty in several places. But vain in the biblical sense. Transient, impermanent, unable to outlast time or withstand the erosions that life inevitably produces. Everything external that we spend so much energy cultivating and protecting will pass. What remains is what is built in the interior, in the character, in the habits of the heart, in the choices made over decades of daily living. That is what remains, and that is what matters. The woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. And by extension, because Proverbs consistently applies its wisdom without gender distinction in its deeper principles, the person who fears the Lord, the person who has chosen day after day to organize their life around the recognition that God is real and God is good and God's ways are the right ways and God's word is the final authority, that person is to be praised, not because they are perfect, not because their life is uncomplicated or their path has been free of difficulty, but because they chose the right foundation, and on that foundation they built imperfectly and faithfully a life that holds. This is the invitation that stands at the close of everything this study has offered. Not a destination, but a direction. Not an achievement, but an orientation. The fear of the Lord, daily, humbly, practically, joyfully lived, as the center around which everything else in your life is organized. May you live it. May it transform you. May the wisdom of Proverbs not simply inhabit your mind, but take root in your heart and bear fruit in your life for every season that remains. The 26th, teaching, the mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life. Proverbs 10:11 says, "The mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence." We have already explored the power of the tongue in its general dimensions, the death and life that it carries, the healing that wise speech produces, the destruction that rash words inflict. But this particular verse draws our attention to something even more specific and even more beautiful. The mouth of the righteous person is not merely neutral, not merely harmless, not merely the absence of damage. It is a fountain of life, active, generative, producing something that nourishes and sustains and refreshes everyone who drinks from it. A fountain in the ancient Near Eastern world was not an ornamental feature of a garden. It was a vital and precious thing. the source of water in a dry land, the reason a settlement could survive in an otherwise inhospitable environment. People gathered at fountains, travelers sought them out, communities were built around them. And Proverbs says that this is what the mouth of the righteous person is in the world they inhabit. Not just a nice addition to the landscape, a source of life around which others gather because they are genuinely nourished by what they find there. What does it mean practically for your mouth to be a fountain of life? It means that the people in your regular sphere, your family, your colleagues, your neighbors, your friends, the people who encounter you in the ordinary flow of daily life are consistently nourished by their interactions with you, that they leave conversations with you carrying something they did not have before, that your words impart courage to the discouraged, clarity to the confused, comfort to the grieving, truth to the deceived, and the specific quality of spiritual encouragement that can only come from a heart that is itself regularly drinking from the ultimate fountain. Proverbs 13:14 says, "The teaching of the wise is a fountain of life, that one may turn away from the snares of death." The teaching of the wise, the wisdom that flows from a person who has genuinely internalized and lived the principles of Proverbs, does not merely enrich, it protects. It turns people away from snares. It gives them the discernment to recognize the path that only seems right, and the courage to take the harder, better path instead. A person whose mouth is a fountain of life in this sense is one of the most valuable people in any community. Not because they are the most visible or the most celebrated, but because they are the most genuinely helpful. They are making people safer, wiser, and more alive simply by speaking from a heart that is itself aligned with the source of all life. The contrast is stark. The mouth of the wicked conceals violence. Conceals, hidden beneath pleasant or neutral or even charming surface communication, is something destructive. The wicked person's speech may not always look like violence. It may look like flattery, like manipulation, like the careful presentation of information designed to produce a specific outcome that serves the speaker at the expense of the listener. But Proverbs sees beneath the surface and identifies what is actually happening, the concealed violence of speech that is ultimately self-serving, that does not nourish but consumes, that does not build others up but positions itself at their expense. The invitation is both challenging and beautiful. Let your mouth be a fountain, not just occasionally, in the moments when you feel spiritually warm and generous, but consistently as a matter of character developed over time through the daily disciplines that keep your own interior life connected to the source. You can only give what you have. You can only pour out what you have received. The fountain that pours out life must itself be filled, and the filling happens in the hidden places, in the prayer closet, in the open Bible, in the honest conversation with God about your own condition, in the receiving of correction and grace. Fill well, so that the pouring out is genuine. The 27th teaching, righteousness, exalts, but sin is a reproach. Proverbs 14:34 says, "Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people." This teaching moves Proverbs' wisdom from the individual to the collective, from the single life to the community, the culture, the nation. Because wisdom in Proverbs is not merely personal self-improvement, it is social. The wise person is not just better off individually. They make the world around them better, and the opposite is equally true. The widespread practice of folly does not merely harm the individuals who practice it, it shapes and degrades the culture they inhabit. Righteousness exalts, not military power, not economic strength, not cultural sophistication or technological achievement or diplomatic cleverness, though all of these have their place. Righteousness. The collective practice, by enough people in a community, of honest dealing, just treatment of others, faithful stewardship of what has been entrusted to them, genuine care for the vulnerable and the overlooked. When righteousness characterizes the way a people operate, when honesty is the norm rather than the exception, when justice is pursued rather than purchased, when the weak are protected rather than exploited, something elevating happens to the entire community. And sin is a reproach. Not merely a private problem for the individuals involved, a reproach, a source of shame, a mark of disgrace, something that diminishes the dignity of the entire people who tolerate or celebrate it. The consistent toleration of dishonesty in commerce, of injustice in legal and social systems, of the exploitation of the vulnerable by the powerful, of the breakdown of basic relational and communal integrity. These are not merely moral failures. They are the gradual cumulative erosion of the foundation on which a community's well-being rests. And Proverbs says clearly, this path leads to reproach. Proverbs 29:2 says, when the righteous increase, the people rejoice, but when the wicked rule, the people groan. The state of leadership in a community has direct and profound effects on the well-being of everyone in it. When righteous people, people of genuine integrity, wisdom, and care for others' welfare, are in positions of influence and leadership, the community flourishes. When the wicked rule, when positions of leadership are occupied by people whose primary motivation is self-interest, whose commitment to truth is contingent on its usefulness to them, whose care for the vulnerable extends only as far as it serves their own advancement, the people groan, not metaphorically, actually. The burden of living under leadership that does not genuinely serve the community is felt in the bodies and spirits of ordinary people who have no direct influence over the leaders who affect their lives. This teaching has a personal application that is often overlooked. Every person is a leader in some sphere. The parent who leads their household, the manager who leads their team, the teacher who leads their classroom, the neighbor who leads by example in their street. The friend whose character sets a tone for the group they are part of. In every sphere of influence, however large or small, righteousness exalts and sin is a reproach. The practice of integrity in your particular sphere is not just good for you, it elevates everyone around you. And the abdication of that integrity does not merely affect you, it diminishes everyone in your orbit. Be the person whose presence raises the level of righteousness in every room you enter. Not through religious performance or moral posturing, but through the quiet, consistent, genuine practice of honesty, fairness, kindness, and integrity that makes you someone your community, your family, your workplace, your neighborhood, your church is genuinely better for having in it. The 28th teaching, the blessing of a good reputation. Proverbs 22:1 says, "A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and favor is better than silver or gold." We have visited the theme of wealth and its limits. Now we return to it from a specific angle, the comparison between a good name and material wealth. Because Proverbs returns to it, and because the contemporary world consistently presses in the opposite direction from what Proverbs recommends. A good name. In the ancient world, your name was your identity in a far more comprehensive sense than it is in modern Western culture. Your name carried your family, your history, your reputation, your standing in the community. To have a good name was not merely to have people think well of you. It was to be a certain kind of person, in a certain kind of standing, with a certain kind of social and spiritual weight behind you. And Proverbs says that this, the accumulated reputation of a life well lived, the standing that comes from years of honest dealing and faithful relationship and genuine service, is worth more than great riches. Why? Because a good name does things that money cannot do. It opens doors that wealth alone cannot open. The person who is known to be honest, to keep their word, to treat others with genuine fairness and care, to follow through on commitments regardless of whether anyone is watching. This person is trusted with things that the wealthiest person without those qualities will never be trusted with. Genuine relationships of depth and mutual respect. Leadership in situations that require trust. The willingness of others to give them the benefit of the doubt in ambiguous situations. The loyalty of people who have seen their character demonstrated over time and who would follow them into difficulty, because they have already seen them in difficulty and watched them handle it with grace. Proverbs 10:7 says, "The memory of the righteous is a blessing, but the name of the wicked will rot." And what remains after a person is gone, the memory of them, the reputation they leave behind, the way people speak of them when they are no longer present to manage the impression, is the truest measure of the name they built. And Proverbs says that the memory of the righteous is a blessing, not just a positive memory, a blessing, something that continues to do good in the world, that continues to encourage and strengthen and orient the people who carry it. The parent whose righteous memory continues to guide their children's decisions decades after they are gone. The mentor whose integrity continues to shape the character of those they influenced long after the relationship ended. This is the legacy of a good name. It outlives the person who built it and continues to bless the world they left behind. Build your name carefully, not your personal brand, your name, not your online presence, your character. Not the impression you are managing in various social contexts, who you actually are when no one is looking, when there is nothing to gain, when the only audience is God and yourself. That is where your real name is being formed. And that name, built consistently over time, is worth more than any financial portfolio you could assemble, and it will outlast every material asset you will ever accumulate. The 29th teaching, the contentment that wisdom produces. Proverbs 14:30 says, "A tranquil heart gives life to the flesh, but envy makes the bones rot." In a culture engineered to produce perpetual dissatisfaction, where every platform is designed to show you what others have that you do not, where comparison has been built into the architecture of social life in a way that is entirely unprecedented in human history. The quality of contentment that Proverbs describes is genuinely countercultural, not resignation, not the passive acceptance of injustice or the abandonment of legitimate aspiration, but the deep, abiding satisfaction of a heart that has learned to receive what God has given with genuine gratitude rather than measuring it constantly against what others have received. A tranquil heart gives life to the flesh. Modern medicine is increasingly confirming what ancient wisdom has always known. The quality of a person's interior life has profound and measurable effects on their physical health. The physiological consequences of chronic anxiety, chronic comparison, chronic bitterness, chronic stress, these are not merely psychological, they are biological. The body bears the weight of what the heart carries. And conversely, the peace of a genuinely tranquil heart, a heart that has learned to trust God with what it cannot control, to receive with gratitude what it has been given, to release the need to have everything it desires immediately, produces a quality of physical well-being that no amount of health optimization can fully replicate. Envy makes the bones rot. The physicality of this image is deliberate and striking. Envy is not merely unpleasant, it is corrosive. It eats from the inside. The person who spends their emotional energy measuring their life against the lives of others, who cannot see someone else's blessing without experiencing it as a diminishment of their own, who cannot celebrate what God has given another person because they are too consumed with what God has not yet given them, is doing genuine, ongoing damage to their own soul and their own body. Proverbs does not soften this. It does not call envy merely suboptimal or spiritually immature. It calls it bone rotting because that is what it does. Proverbs 15:16-17 offers the foundation of genuine contentment. Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and trouble with it. Better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a fattened ox and hatred with it. The quality of a life is not determined by the quantity of its resources. Two people can sit down to dinner, one to a lavish meal in a house full of tension and bitterness, one to a simple meal in a home full of genuine love and laughter. And the one with less will have infinitely more. Because the things that actually determine the quality of a lived experience are interior. The presence of love, the presence of peace, the presence of genuine connection, the presence of the fear of the Lord that puts everything else in its right proportion. Contentment is not a passive state. It is an active, practiced, disciplined orientation of the heart. It is the daily choice to notice what you have been given rather than what you have not yet received. To celebrate what God is doing in another person's life without translating it into a complaint about your own. To receive each day's provision with gratitude rather than immediately cataloging its insufficiencies relative to what you hoped for. Contentment is a muscle. It is built through exercise, and the more consistently you practice it, the more deliberately you choose gratitude over complaint, celebration over envy, trust over anxiety, the stronger it becomes, and the more genuinely tranquil the heart that holds it. The 30th teaching, the discipline of seeking wise counsel. Proverbs 15:22 says, "Without counsel plans fail, but with many advisers they succeed." And Proverbs 20:18 says, "Plans are established by counsel, by wise guidance wage war." The independent spirit, the person who makes their own decisions, relies on their own judgment, does not need advice from anyone, is celebrated in contemporary culture as a model of strength and self-sufficiency. And Proverbs says, directly and without apology, that this person is setting themselves up for avoidable failure, not because independence is inherently bad, but because the human perspective, even at its most developed and most intelligent, is always limited. It sees from one angle, it is shaped by one history, it has one set of experiences and biases and blind spots, and the decisions of a life are simply too consequential to be made only from within that one limited perspective. Without counsel, plans fail. Not might fail, fail. The certainty Proverbs expresses here is rooted in a consistent observation, plans made without the benefit of wise input, without the perspective of people who can see what the plan maker cannot, who know things the plan maker does not, who are not emotionally invested in the plan's success in the same way the plan maker is, consistently underperform what they could have been, not because the plan maker is incompetent, but because they were working with insufficient information and insufficient perspective, and the plan reflects those limitations. With many advisors, they succeed. Not just one voice, many. The wisdom of multiple perspectives, genuinely sought and genuinely considered, produces plans that are more robust, more realistic, more capable of surviving contact with the complexity of the real world. This does not mean that every decision requires a committee. It does not mean that you cannot make choices without first consulting a room full of people. It means that for the significant decisions, the ones that will define the direction of your life, that will affect the people you are responsible for, that carry major and long-lasting consequences, the investment of time and humility required to seek genuine counsel is worth it. Every time. Proverbs 11:14 says, "Where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in an abundance of counselors there is safety." The safety that comes from multiple wise perspectives is real, because different wise people will notice different things. One will see the financial risk you have not fully accounted for. Another will notice the relational dynamic that could become problematic. A third will identify the ethical dimension that you had not yet considered. Together, the perspectives create a more complete picture of the terrain ahead than any single perspective could provide. But who are the wise counselors worth seeking? Proverbs gives us a clear criterion: people whose lives demonstrate the fruit of wisdom. Not necessarily the most successful by external metrics, not the most eloquent or the most confident or the most opinionated. The people whose actual lives, their character, their relationships, their track record of decision-making over time, show the evidence of genuine wisdom applied genuinely. These are the voices worth giving access to your most significant decisions. These are the perspectives worth weighing most carefully, and there is a final counselor that Proverbs points to above all others, the Lord himself. Proverbs 3:6 says, "In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths." Nowadays, the ultimate counsel is sought on our knees, in the honest prayer that brings the decision before God and genuinely waits for his input, through his word, through his spirit, through the wise people he brings across our path. This counsel is available to every person, regardless of their network or their resources. It is the most democratically available form of wise counsel that exists, and it is offered generously to all who seek it. The 31st teaching, Words that Heal the Broken Proverbs, 16:24 says, "Gracious words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the body." We return once more to the theme of speech, because Proverbs returns to it, and because the specific image offered here adds something that our earlier exploration did not fully develop. Gracious words are like a honeycomb, not just sweet, though sweetness is part of it. But the honeycomb in the ancient world was also a source of energy, of sustenance, of something genuinely nourishing that carried real benefit. David said of God's word that it was sweeter than honey and the dripping of the honeycomb. And Proverbs applies that same image to the gracious words of a wise person. Your words, when governed by grace, have the quality of honey. They sweeten the atmosphere, they nourish the soul, and they produce genuine health effects in the person who receives them. What are gracious words? They are words that carry grace, the undeserved goodness that meets people where they are rather than where they should be, that acknowledges their struggle without condemning their failure, that affirms their worth in the moments when they have most forgotten it. Gracious words are not sentimental or dishonest. Grace and truth are not opposites in Proverbs' understanding. They are complementary. The gracious word is both true and delivered in a way that carries the weight of genuine care for the person receiving it. Proverbs 12:25 says, "Anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down, but a good word makes him glad." Think of the last time you were carrying something heavy, a worry, a fear, a situation that felt too big to manage, and someone said exactly the right thing to you. Not a platitude, not a cheerful dismissal of the reality of your struggle, but a word that was true and kind and specifically suited to your exact situation, that reached into the weight and lifted some of it by showing you a perspective or a truth or a piece of genuine love that you had lost sight of. That experience is what Proverbs is describing, the good word that makes glad, not by denying the difficulty, but by providing something real to hold on to in the middle of it. Proverbs 25:11 says, "A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in a setting of silver." We discussed this image earlier, but its repetition here is deliberate. The fitly spoken word, the word that is both true and timely, both accurate and compassionately delivered, is compared to precious art. It is beautiful. It is rare. It is the product of attentiveness and wisdom and genuine love working together to produce something that could only be given by someone who was actually present, actually listening, actually caring about the specific person in the specific moment before them. You have this capacity. Perhaps it has not been fully developed. Perhaps you have defaulted to the habits of your environment, to the careless speech that characterizes so much contemporary communication, to the unfiltered reaction, to the habit of speaking before listening. But the capacity for gracious, healing, honeycomb-quality speech is available to any person who is willing to do the inner work that makes outer words genuinely good. Guard your heart, and the mouth will eventually follow. Immerse yourself in the Word of God, and the words that come out of you will increasingly carry the quality of that word. Practice attentiveness to the people around you, and you will find the fitly spoken word arriving more naturally because you have been paying the kind of attention that makes it possible to know what needs to be said. Speak grace today into the lives of the people who most need it, who are waiting for a word that will make the weight they carry slightly lighter and the road they are walking slightly clearer. The 30-second teaching, the snare of the comparison trap. Proverbs 14:30 has already told us that envy makes the bones rot. Now Proverbs 23:17-18 speaks directly into the practical experience of seeing others prosper in ways that trigger comparison and disorientation. Let not your heart envy sinners, but continue in the fear of the Lord all the day. Surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off. One of the most consistent pastoral challenges that the wisdom writers of Proverbs faced, the same challenge that drove the psalmist of Psalm 73 to the brink of losing his faith, is the experience of watching people who are living without wisdom or without God appear to flourish, while people who are genuinely trying to live wisely and faithfully appear to struggle. This observation, when it is made, has the potential to devastate faith. Because if wisdom genuinely produces better outcomes, why do so many apparently foolish people seem to be doing so well? And if righteousness is genuinely rewarded, why do so many apparently righteous people seem to be paying such a high price for their righteousness? Proverbs does not dismiss this observation. It takes it seriously because the writers of these texts were not insulated from it. They saw what you see. They noticed the same apparent inconsistency. And they offer not a simple resolution, but a deepened perspective that changes the frame without denying the reality. The frame that changes everything is the long view. Proverbs 24:19-20 says, "Fret not yourself because of evildoers, and be not envious of the wicked. For the evil man has no future. The lamp of the wicked will be put out. The lamp will be put out." The prosperity that looks so permanent, so well established, so solid, is not built on what lasts. It is burning on fuel that does not last, and the person who envies it is envying something that is already in the process of exhausting itself, even when the exhaustion is not yet visible. Surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off. This is the word that sustains the person who is choosing the right path in the season when the right path appears to be producing less than the wrong one. Your hope is not cut off. The investment you are making in integrity, in wisdom, in faithful relationship with God and others is not going to waste. It is building something that will still be standing when the lamp of the wicked has long since been extinguished. Continue in the fear of the Lord all the day, not just in the moments when it is visibly producing results, all the day. In the moments when it appears to be costing you something that it is not yet compensating for. In the moments when the comparison is most sharp and the temptation to abandon the narrow path is most strong. All the day. Because the accumulation of all those days, the sustained faithfulness through the seasons when faithfulness is most difficult, is what produces the character that eventually carries the fruit that only long-sustained faithfulness can produce. The comparison trap is real, and it is baited with something that looks exactly like wisdom, the reasonable observation that other people seem to be doing better. The antidote is not pretending not to notice. The antidote is the longer view, the deeper trust, and the daily recommitment to a path whose best rewards are not always immediately visible, but whose ultimate destination is the only one worth reaching. The 33rd teaching, the fruit of patience in conflict. Proverbs 20:22 says, "Do not say, 'I will repay evil.' Wait for the Lord, and he will deliver you." And Proverbs 25:21-22 says, "If your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat, and if he is thirsty, give him water to drink. For you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you." These teachings arrive at one of the most genuinely difficult applications in the entire book of Proverbs, and in the entirety of Scripture for that matter. The instruction not to repay evil, not to retaliate, not to get even, to wait on the Lord instead of taking justice into your own hands, and more than that, to actively extend generosity toward the person who has wronged you. This is not weakness, though it is consistently misread as weakness. It requires more internal strength than retaliation does, not less, because retaliation is the path of least resistance. It is what the injured heart naturally gravitates toward, what feels like the restoration of balance, what provides the momentary satisfaction of action in the face of wrong. Withholding retaliation, choosing instead to wait on the Lord and even to extend grace toward an enemy, requires the kind of self-mastery that Proverbs elsewhere identifies as greater than taking a city. Do not say, "I will repay evil." The instruction begins with the mouth, with the vow of retaliation, because the vow of retaliation is where the cycle of ongoing harm usually begins. Someone wrongs you. You vow to make it right by making them feel what they made you feel. They experience your retaliation as wrong and vow their own retaliation in return. And the cycle escalates, consuming both parties, accomplishing nothing except the spreading of the original harm into every corner of both lives. Proverbs says, "Do not start the cycle, do not speak the vow. Wait for the Lord. Wait for the Lord, and he will deliver you." This promise requires genuine trust, because waiting for the Lord feels passive in a moment that screams for action. It feels like letting the injustice stand when everything in you wants to address it. But Proverbs is not saying that God will do nothing about genuine wrong. It is saying that God's addressing of wrong is more complete, more just, more ultimately satisfying than anything your retaliation could produce. He sees the full picture. He knows the hearts of all parties. His justice is perfect in a way that human justice, especially justice administered by one of the injured parties, simply cannot be. And then the extraordinary instruction of Proverbs 25, "Feed your enemy. Give him water," not with the motivation of shaming them, though the image of heaping burning coals on a head suggests that genuine kindness has a kind of convicting power that aggression never achieves. But with the motivation of responding to human need, regardless of what that human has done to you. This is wisdom that runs so deep and so far against the grain of natural human instinct that it can only come from the Spirit of God. And indeed, Paul quotes it almost verbatim in Romans 12 as part of his instruction to the early church about how to live in a world that will sometimes treat them unjustly. The wisdom of this teaching is not naive about the reality of wrong or the genuine hurt that comes from being treated unjustly. It is utterly realistic about those things. And it says, in the middle of that reality, choose the higher way. Not because the wrong does not matter, but because retaliation will not heal the wound or restore the justice, while trust in God and the extension of grace, the outrageous, counterintuitive, impossible without His help grace, has the power to do both in His time and in His way. The 34th teaching, the righteous are as bold as a lion. Proverbs 28:1 says, "The wicked flee when no one pursues, but the righteous are bold as a lion." There is a quality of internal freedom that integrity produces which is difficult to describe to someone who has not experienced it, but which every person who has lived with genuine integrity in their daily life will immediately recognize. It is the freedom of having nothing to hide, of knowing that what you are in private matches what you are in public, of not carrying the cognitive and emotional burden of managing multiple versions of yourself or maintaining the separation between the things you do and the person you present yourself as being. The wicked flee when no one pursues. The person whose life is built on concealment lives in a kind of permanent low-grade anxiety. Every knock on the door, every unexpected phone call, every encounter with someone from a particular part of their life produces a flicker. Is this the moment? Is this how it comes undone? They are fleeing a pursuer that exists only in their own consciousness, running from the accumulated weight of what they are carrying. This is not the freedom they thought dishonesty would bring them. This is the prison it built instead. The righteous are bold as a lion. The lion's boldness in the ancient imagination was not recklessness. It was the confidence of a creature whose strength is genuine, whose position is established, who has no need to shrink or to flee. And the righteousness person's boldness is the same. Not arrogance, not the manufactured confidence of someone who is performing security they do not feel, but the genuine, grounded, unshakable confidence that comes from having built your life on something real. You can walk into rooms where your name is known because what is known about you is true. You can face difficult conversations because you have nothing to conceal. You can engage with critics and opponents without being undone by the encounter because your security is not located in their approval. This boldness is not a natural personality trait that some people have and others do not. It is the fruit of a particular kind of life, lived a particular way, over a sustained period of time. It is available to every person willing to do the unglamorous, daily, sometimes costly work of living with genuine integrity. And its value, both practically and spiritually, is difficult to overstate. The world desperately needs people who can be bold as lions because they have nothing to hide. People whose yes means yes and whose no means no. People who can look anyone in the eye because they are the same person regardless of who is looking. Be that person. Build that life. And let the freedom of genuine righteousness produce in you a boldness that no external circumstance can take away. The 35th teaching, the priority of the inner life over the outer appearance. Proverbs 4:24-27 says, "Put away from you crooked speech, and put devious talk far from you. Let your eyes look directly forward, and your gaze be straight before you. Ponder the path of your feet, then all your ways will be sure. Do not swerve to the right or to the left. Turn your foot away from evil." This passage is a remarkable summary of what a life of wisdom looks like in its moment-to-moment practice. It is not describing great dramatic spiritual experiences or exceptional moments of divine encounter. It is describing the ordinary day, the way a wise person moves through the unremarkable succession of hours and choices and conversations that constitute the actual texture of most of life. Put away crooked speech. The speech instruction comes first, because speech is the most constant and most consequential expression of the inner life. Every day brings hundreds of opportunities to speak with integrity or without it, to say what is true or to shade it slightly in a direction more favorable to yourself, to communicate clearly or to leave things strategically unclear, to speak well of others, or to allow the subtle undermining comment that damages without being overtly dishonest. Each of these small choices seems individually insignificant, but cumulatively they form the character of your speech, and the character of your speech reveals and simultaneously forms the character of your soul. Let your eyes look directly forward. This instruction about the gaze speaks to the discipline of focus, of not being perpetually distracted by what is off to the sides, by comparison and envy and the endless attraction of things that are not your actual path. The person whose gaze is straight ahead is the person who knows where they are going and is not constantly being pulled sideways by every passing alternative. This takes practice in a world that has been deliberately engineered to capture your attention and redirect it. The discipline of keeping your eyes on the path God has set before you, of resisting the constant pull of distraction, comparison, and the seductive alternatives to the narrow way, is one of the defining disciplines of a wise life. Ponder the path of your feet. Consider it. Think about it. Not obsessively, not anxiously, but deliberately. Where is this particular choice leading? What direction am I actually moving in if I continue the current trajectory? Is this path taking me toward the life I want to have built? Or is it taking me somewhere I will not want to be? The pondering of the path is not a luxury for people with too much time on their hands. It is essential. The person who never stops to evaluate direction does not know whether the energy they are expending is taking them somewhere worth going. Do not swerve to the right or the left. Proverbs is not recommending a kind of rigid, joyless, inflexible adherence to a predetermined track that leaves no room for the legitimate responsiveness that life requires. It is addressing the specific danger of the gradual drift, the slow, almost imperceptible accumulation of small swerves that individually each seem entirely reasonable and that cumulatively constitute a significant departure from the path. This is how most people end up far from where they meant to be, not through a single dramatic wrong turn, but through the gradual accumulation of many small ones that were each, in the moment, easy to rationalize. Stay on the path. Come back to the center when you drift. Ponder your direction regularly. Keep your gaze forward and put away speech that is anything less than genuinely honest. This is what wisdom looks like on an ordinary Tuesday. And it is on the ordinary Tuesdays, accumulated into months and years and decades, that the life of wisdom is actually built. The 36th teaching, the generous heart that never runs dry. Proverbs 3:27-28 says, "Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to do it. Do not say to your neighbor, 'Go and come again, tomorrow I will give it,' when you have it with you." The timing of generosity matters as much as the fact of it. Proverbs is not merely calling us to be people who eventually give, who eventually help, who eventually show up, when it is convenient, when the conditions are optimal, when we have properly planned and budgeted for the giving. It is calling us to an immediacy of generosity that reflects the character of a God who does not delay his grace to those who need it. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to do it. When it is in your power. This is the key phrase. If you have the capacity to do good right now, to meet a need, to provide a resource, to give a word or an hour or a dollar or a meal or a skill, and you withhold it without genuine reason, something is wrong. Not necessarily in your finances, in your heart. Something has closed that should be open. Some calculation has replaced some generosity that should have been instinctive. The postponement described in verse 28, "Go and come again, tomorrow I will give it," is particularly subtle because it does not look like refusal. It looks like delay. It sounds almost responsible. I am not saying no, I am saying not yet. But when the need is present, when the resource is available, and when the only thing standing between the two is your own hesitation, Proverbs says the hesitation is the problem. It is a form of withholding dressed as prudence. Proverbs 11:26 says, "The people curse him who holds back grain, but a blessing is on the head of him who sells it." The image is agricultural, but the principle is universal. The person who hoards when others need, who withholds what they have while others lack, will eventually be cursed. Not in a supernatural sense necessarily, but in the very practical sense that people will recognize what they are dealing with and withdraw their trust and goodwill accordingly. The person who releases what they have, who gives freely when giving, is the appropriate response to need, receives blessing, the goodwill, the trust, the relational richness that flows toward an open hand. Proverbs 19:6 notes with characteristic realism, "Many seek the favor of a generous man, and everyone is a friend to a man who gives gifts." This observation is not naive. Proverbs recognizes that not every person drawn to a generous person is drawn by pure motives. Some are drawn by what they can get, but the fundamental reality it is pointing to is this: generosity creates magnetic connection. The open hand draws people. The closed fist repels them. This is not merely social strategy. It is the reflection of a deeper spiritual reality. Generosity is the character of God, and when a human being reflects it, they are reflecting something that other human beings recognize, consciously or not, as genuinely attractive. Give now when it is in your power. Not tomorrow, not after you have thought about it more fully and arranged it more conveniently. Now, when the need is before you and the capacity is in your hand. That immediacy is the living expression of a generous heart, and it is one of the most godlike qualities a human being can display. The 37th teaching, wisdom in the marketplace and the workplace. Proverbs 16:11 says, "A just balance and scales are the Lord's. All the weights in the bag are his work." Proverbs was written in a world where commerce was conducted with physical scales and weights, where the temptation to use slightly inaccurate measures, to tip the balance in your favor, to give less than you were paid for, to receive more than you were owed, was a constant practical temptation for anyone involved in trade. And Proverbs speaks into this very ordinary commercial reality with a theological statement that is anything but ordinary. Just scales are the Lord's. The God of the universe, the one who spoke creation into existence and who governs the nations, is directly interested in whether your business dealings are honest. He is interested in whether you are giving people what they actually paid for. This verse extends, by obvious implication, far beyond the literal scale and weight. In contemporary life, the equivalent of the dishonest scale is every form of commercial misrepresentation. The product that is described more impressively than it actually is, the service that is billed for time that was not genuinely spent, the contract that is written to appear fair while being designed to exploit, the salary that is artificially suppressed in a negotiation where the employer knows the market rate and the employee does not. Every one of these is the contemporary equivalent of a dishonest weight, and Proverbs says that God's eye is on all of it. Proverbs 11:1 says, "A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight." Abomination is one of the strongest words in the Hebrew Bible. It is used to describe things that are not merely wrong or unwise, but deeply offensive to the character of God. And Proverbs applies it to dishonest scales, to cheating in business. The implication is unmistakable. God takes commercial honesty with extraordinary seriousness. He is not confined to the temple or the synagogue or the church. He is present in the marketplace. He is watching what happens at the negotiating table. He sees the invoice and he knows what was actually delivered. And dishonesty in that space, however normalized by the culture around it, however justified by the business pressures of the moment, is an abomination to him. The positive side is equally strong. A just weight is his delight. The honest business person, the contractor who does exactly what they promised for exactly what they charged, the employer who pays fairly and treats their employees with genuine dignity, the merchant whose product matches its description, this person is a delight to God. Their honest dealings are an act of worship as real as any liturgy. Their integrity in the marketplace is an expression of the character of God in a space where it is desperately needed and often absent. Proverbs 13:11 says, "Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it." The patient, honest accumulation of resources through genuine value creation, through work that actually delivers what it promises, through the building of trust over time, rather than its exploitation in a single transaction, produces something durable. The quick money, the deal that succeeded by taking advantage, the wealth gathered in ways that would not survive public scrutiny. This dwindles, not always immediately, but consistently over time. The foundation on which it was built reveals itself. Whatever your work is, do it with the honesty that Proverbs demands of the marketplace. Give people what you promised. Charge fairly for what you provide. Treat everyone you deal with commercially as someone made in the image of God, whose dignity and interests matter. This is not business advice. It is theology applied to the space where most people spend most of their waking hours. And it is the kind of theology that, consistently lived, produces both the blessing of a clear conscience and the practical fruit of a reputation that sustains a business or a career over the long term. The 38th teaching, the instruction that leads to life. Proverbs 6:20-23 says, "My son, keep your father's commandment, and forsake not your mother's teaching. Bind them on your heart always, tie them around your neck. When you walk, they will lead you. When you lie down, they will watch over you, and when you awake, they will talk with you. For the commandment is a lamp, and the teaching a light, and the reproofs of discipline are the way of life." This passage is extraordinary in its vision of what the wisdom instruction received from parents and from God can do in a life when it is genuinely retained and applied. Not merely heard, not merely filed away in memory as interesting information, bound on the heart, tied around the neck, carried constantly, allowed to function as a continuous, living presence in the background of everything you do. When you walk, they will lead you. The instruction, the wisdom received and genuinely internalized, becomes directional. It does not require you to stop and consciously consult it before every decision, the way you might look up a policy in a manual. It operates as an instinct, as a formed character, as the pattern of a life that has been shaped by wisdom over time, so that the wisdom now guides automatically. The way an experienced musician no longer has to consciously think through each note, because the practice has made the notes part of who they are. When you lie down, they will watch over you. The wisdom that is genuinely internalized follows you into your rest. It guards you even in the hours when you are not conscious enough to guard yourself. It has become part of the very structure of the person you are, so that even when your defenses are down, the wisdom is still present, still operational, still doing its work of protecting and orienting the life it inhabits. When you awake, they will talk with you. There is something beautiful and intimate about this image. The instruction, the teaching, the wisdom, as a companion who is there when you first regain consciousness at the beginning of a new day, who speaks to you before the day has fully begun, who frames the day before the day's demands have had a chance to set its agenda. This is the fruit of wisdom that has been deeply, genuinely received. It becomes a constant inner conversation, a continuous orientation, a voice that is always available to guide and comfort and direct. For the commandment is a lamp, and the teaching a light. We return again to the lamp image. The commandment illuminates. The teaching enlightens. Not the entire road, not every hazard and every turn for the next 20 years, but the next step, and then the step after that. The person who walks by this lamp does not need to see everything. They need to see what is immediately before them and to trust that the same lamp that illuminated this step will illuminate the next one when they arrive at it. That is all faith requires, not total clarity about the entire journey, just enough light for the next faithful step. The 39th teaching, the magnificent vision of a life fully surrendered. Proverbs 16:3 says, "Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established." And Proverbs 19:21 says, "Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand." These two verses hold in perfect tension the dual reality that every person who has ever tried to live both ambitiously and faithfully will recognize. You are called to plan, to work, to put forth genuine effort and genuine thought into the direction of your life. And simultaneously, the ultimate establishment of what you are building is not in your hands. It is in God's. Commit your work to the Lord. The word commit here in the Hebrew is galal, to roll onto. Roll your work onto the Lord, put it on Him, transfer the weight, not the responsibility. You are still the one who must show up, must apply the diligence, must make the decisions, must do the actual work. But the outcome, the ultimate success or failure, the final verdict on whether this thing you are building will stand, roll that onto Him, because you were not designed to carry it, and your plans will be established. The plans that are rolled onto God, that are genuinely surrendered to His authority and His purposes rather than being held tightly and ultimately directed by self-will be established. They will stand, not necessarily in the form you originally envisioned, not always on the timeline you had in mind, but established, which means grounded, which means lasting, which means that what is built will still be standing when the testing comes. Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. This verse is humbling in the most productive possible way. You make plans, many of them. You think carefully, you strategize, you project, you prepare, you build systems and timelines and backup scenarios, and all of that is good. Diligence in planning is wisdom. But beneath all of your plans, God's purpose is the bedrock. It is not one plan among many, competing with yours, and sometimes winning and sometimes losing. It is the foundation that all the other plans rest on, whether they know it or not. And what is aligned with it stands. What is ultimately contrary to it will eventually give way. This is not a reason for passivity. It is a reason for the particular kind of humble, diligent, surrendered engagement with life's work that Proverbs celebrates throughout. Work hard, plan carefully. Apply wisdom to every dimension of what you are building, and hold it all loosely enough that when God redirects, when circumstances change, when the plan you carefully built meets the reality that God is shaping, you can release your grip on the original plan and follow His leading into what is actually being established. The life fully surrendered to the purposes of God is not a small life. It is not a passive life. It is not a life without vision or ambition or genuine engagement with the world. It is the largest life available to a human being because it is aligned with the largest purposes in the universe. And the plans that God establishes are always larger and better and more fruitful than the plans we would have established for ourselves. The 40th teaching, every generation needs the wisdom of Proverbs. Proverbs 1:1-4 says, "The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth." We have now traveled through 40 teachings from the Book of Proverbs, and we arrive at this final moment with something we could not have had at the beginning: the accumulated weight of an extended encounter with one of the most remarkable books ever written. The beginning of Proverbs states its own purpose with extraordinary clarity. It was written so that its readers would know wisdom and instruction, understand words of insight, receive instruction in wise dealing, righteousness, justice, and equity. It was written to give prudence to the simple and knowledge and discretion to the youth. Notice who is named as the intended audience: the simple, the youth, not the already wise, not the advanced spiritual masters who have long since arrived at the destination that wisdom points toward. The simple, those who have not yet formed their direction. The young, those who are at the beginning of building their lives and have the most to gain from wisdom received early. But by extension, everyone who is still learning, still growing, still in the process of becoming the person God created them to be, which is, until the last breath, every person alive. Every generation needs the wisdom of Proverbs. Not because the circumstances of human life stay the same. They change dramatically across time and culture, but because the fundamental dynamics of human nature, of the human heart, of the temptations that present themselves, and the choices that define character, these remain remarkably consistent. The temptation to pride has not changed. The danger of the tongue has not changed. The importance of integrity and the consequences of its absence have not changed. The value of genuine friendship and the harm of foolish companionship have not changed. The relationship between diligence and flourishing, between humility and honor, between the fear of the Lord and the beginning of wisdom, none of these have changed. This is the gift that Proverbs offers to every generation, not merely the wisdom of its own time and place, but the distilled, tested, divinely inspired insight into the permanent structures of human life in a world made by God. It is the instruction manual that does not go out of date, because human beings, in the things that matter most, do not go out of date. The specific technologies change, the social structures change, the cultural expressions change, but the heart remains, and the wisdom that addresses the heart remains equally relevant. What do you do with everything you have received today? That is the question with which every genuine encounter with wisdom must ultimately end. Because information that does not produce change is just information, and Proverbs was not written to produce more informed people. It was written, as it states in chapter 1, to produce wise people. People whose receiving of wisdom results in wise dealing, in righteousness, in justice, in equity. People whose lives are different because of the wisdom they have genuinely received and genuinely applied. Take the specific teaching that landed most powerfully today and do something with it. Not eventually, not when conditions are more favorable. Now, identify the one area of your life where the wisdom of Proverbs is most directly speaking and make one concrete, specific, immediately actionable decision in response to what you have heard. Guard your heart more intentionally starting today. Speak more graciously to one specific person in your life. Seek the counsel you have been avoiding. Release the bitterness you have been holding. Return to the Word of God in the morning before you pick up your phone. Whatever it is, do it. Let wisdom be more than a beautiful concept. Let it be the thing that changes the actual direction of your actual life. The fear of the Lord is the beginning. Walk in it, and let the path of the righteous shine brighter in your life with every step you take. And with that, we come to the true close of this study. What an extraordinary journey through the wisdom of God it has been. We have sat together in the ancient and ever-living pages of Proverbs and let them speak into every dimension of human life, into our speech and our silence, our work and our rest, our relationships and our solitude, our planning and our surrendering, our seasons of flourishing and our seasons of waiting. If you have made it to the end of this video, something in you is genuinely hungry for the Word of God. That hunger is not accidental. It has been placed in you by the God who is more eager to fill it than you are to have it filled. Don't let that hunger go unaddressed. Let it drive you back to this channel, back to Scripture, back to the wisdom that is still calling out in the streets of your daily life and waiting for you to stop and listen. Subscribe now if you haven't yet. Your subscription is what keeps this connection alive and keeps this teaching finding its way to you. Like this video so that the wisdom of Proverbs can reach more people who are searching for exactly this. Share it with someone whose life it might change, because the best things we have received are the things we share. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from and what teaching landed most deeply today. That conversation builds something real here. And come back. There is so much more ahead in the Word of God. The well does not run dry. The wisdom does not run out. And you belong in this community of people who are choosing, in the middle of their ordinary lives, to pursue the extraordinary gift of walking with God in wisdom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May He lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. May the wisdom of Proverbs be not just something you heard today, but something you become. Day by day, choice by choice, season by season, for as long as you live. Thank you for watching. God bless you.